Paul Griffiths, Cabinet Member with the responsibility for the economy, planning, housing services.
Okay. Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Bren Callard, representing Llanfoes, Farren and Gyfeilen, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Resources. Thank you.
Scrutiny managers, Hazel, Rob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Robert McGowan, Policy and Scrutiny Officer.
Lovely.
And Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny Manager, Virtual Chair.
Thank you. And I understand we've got Peter Davis and James Davis.
Good morning, Chair. Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive, Section 151 Officer of the Council. And again, we've got Jonathan Davis on the call as well. If you want to bring Jonathan in just to introduce himself. Thanks.
Good morning, Chair. Yeah, Jonathan Davis, Head of Finance, Monmouthshire.
Apologies, Jonathan. And you'll both be along with Councillor Callard presenting the first report, and I'll allow officers on the second report to introduce themselves. We'll just quickly go through the members. So first of all, I've got Councillor Louise Brown.
Good morning, Councillor Brown, representing Shire Newton Ward and a member of this committee. Thank you.
Councillor Brin.
Councillor Emma Brin, representing Wysham Ward and a member of this committee.
Councillor Davis.
Good morning, Councillor Thomas Dawid Davis, a member for Llanfoes, Farren and Gyfeilen, and I'm a member of this committee.
Councillor Lucas.
Morning, Jane Lucas, ward member for Osbaston, Monmouth, and a member of this committee.
Councillor Stevens.
Good morning, Councillor Maria Stevens, 7 Ward, Caldicot, and I'm a member of this committee.
Councillor Strong.
Morning, Councillor Jackie Strong, representing Caldicot Cross and a member of this committee.
And Councillor Wright.
Morning, Councillor Wright, member for Growfield Ward in Abergavenny and a member of this committee.
Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, good morning, Bore da, Tudor Thomas, Councillor for Park in Abergavenny and a member of this committee. Thanks, diolch.
And I understand we have a visiting member, Councillor Howarth. Would you like to introduce yourself, Councillor Howarth?
Yes, morning Chair and morning members. Councillor Howarth, representing Lynette Leals Clinic and Gilwan, and not a member of the committee, but items on the agenda which are of interest. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we have a full house this morning, no apologies. Declarations of interest, we'll take those as and when. So we don't have anyone for the public open forum, so we'll move to item 4. Our first report is the Council's revenue and capital budget proposals being presented by Councillor Ben Callard and Cabinet Member for Resource, and officers Jonathan Davis and Peter Davis. So over to you, Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a presentation about the budget. I know some of you would have already seen it, but I don't know, Chair, if you'd find it useful if I just quickly ran through it, just to give us a bit of context.
Yes, thank you.
Hold on one moment. I will just share my screen. Right, I think everyone should be able to see that. The 2024-2025 budget, I'm sure you'll all be aware that the current economic circumstances on local councils are extremely challenging at the moment. For the last decade, our increases in funding have not kept pace with not only the increased demand that we've been seeing, but also the inflationary pressure on top of that. We know the circumstances in which we're operating are difficult. We've had an energy price shock over the last 2 years, which is thankfully starting to ease due to the war in Ukraine, and generally a difficult economic outlook. So for the second year in a row, this authority is seeing cost pressures of over £20 million. What that means is that without any additional funding to continue to provide the same services that we provided in the last financial year, it will cost us an additional £21.9 million. These cost pressures consist of new demand, recurrent demand, and the inflationary costs associated with both of those. Pay inflation due to the high inflation environment we've been in for the last 18 months, which is thankfully starting to ease. The unwinding of one-off reserve usage, and that is where last year we used some of our revenue reserves as part of our revenue budget. This year we've made the choice not to use any revenue reserves, and therefore we need to fill that gap which last year was supported by the revenue reserves. So that's where that £2.7 million comes from, and then increased precepts of £1.2 million, and these are really costs that we passport through from the police and our town and community councils. So where does the council spend its money? You can see here in this pie chart that 2/3 of our budget go on children and young people and social care and health. And I think the trend that we've seen over the last few years, and it looks set to continue, is that increased demand in social care and health. When we look back over many years, social care and health is really growing and growing and growing to take up more and more of our budget, and then that other third, the third that's left, I think that's taken up with what a lot of people associate the council services with, such as waste collections, leisure centres, housing, transport. So that gives a really nice outlook as to where the money goes. In an earlier slide, I talked briefly about the £21.9 million. On the left here, you can see a stacked bar, which is showing where that's coming from. I talked about it previously, and on the right side, you can see how we are proposing to bridge that gap to get to our balanced budget. You can see the largest proportion of that is made up with changes to our services. The second largest amount is our proposed council tax increase of 7.5%, which generates an additional £5.4 million of income. Our Welsh Government grant increase to 2.3%, which generates £2.7 million. A reduction in borrowing and energy costs. I mentioned it earlier, but the police and community councils precepts, they get passported over, and then the increase in fees and charges where they're applicable in terms of the council services. So, £11.8 million of key service pressures. I won't run through them one by one, but really I think to pick out adult social care, you can see there £4.1 million. That really continues the trend that we saw in 2023, 2024, where there's been a lot of additional pressure in adult social care, and it's not just it's not just greater numbers of people requiring social care, it's that those people requiring care often require more complex care, which has an associated cost with it. The other big numbers there are the real living wage impact in social care, and again that's driven by the high inflation that we've seen, and then the increased costs in recycling and waste. So, to wrap those last few slides up, the gap is £21.9 million. We are proposing that our income will increase by £10.1 million, which is our government grant, it's our council tax, and that we're not going to use our revenue reserves to support this budget, and therefore we get to the £8.4 million of service savings that we need to find in order to balance the budget for next year. We've built this budget around 5 key principles. They are a financially responsible council, protecting our most vulnerable, reducing inequalities, protecting our environment, and planning for the future. And I would just say that in the financial situation we find ourselves in, having what is in effect, in real terms, less money, it is really challenging to work within these proposals, and it's really about trying to prioritise our services that we feel protect the most vulnerable and are most valuable to our residents. So the next few slides go through each directorate. There's a slide on each, and they just cover the main service changes that we're expecting in each directorate, and in terms of their financial impact on the budget. So we'll start with children and young people, and it's our proposal to increase that budget by 2.5% next year, which is, it's greater than the 2.3% that our funding's been increased by Welsh Government. But the main line item there is about schools funding, and this is the individual schools budgets. We're proposing to increase them by 2.5%, but we know we are expecting this year the pay award for teachers and non-teaching school staff. We're expecting that to be 4.4% for teachers and 4.5% for non-teaching staff. We are proposing funding 65% of that cost increase. Now that total pressure on schools is £2.2 million. So there will be £835,000 left over as a result of us not being able to fully fund that pay award, which we're going to be asking schools to find within their own budgets in order to fund the teachers and non-teaching staff pay award. Additional learning provision. This isn't a reduction in the service, this is a reduction in the cost of the service. So currently we use out-of-county placements for some of our young people who have additional learning provision. It's very expensive, and what we're proposing to do is to invest within our schools estate within Monmouthshire in order that we can bring those places back in-house. We're not sending the money out of county, we are doing it in-house, and it has a significant cost save associated with it. So I think that's a really good example of us making positive changes to our services, which will not affect the front line in terms of the services that people are receiving. Gwent Music Service, a reduction of £39,000 in our subsidy that we provide them. That leaves a £9,000 hardship fund, which we are planning on leaving in place to support those on low incomes. We are the last local authority within Gwent that subsidises the Gwent Music Service. And at this point, we feel that, we need to be probably aligned with the rest of Gwent in order to be prudent. The before school clubs, I'm sure for those of you that use them, you'll be very familiar with them, but they're usually split into two halves. There is the second half of the session, which is usually from 8:20 or 8:30 until school starts, where you can get a free breakfast and you can drop your child off a little bit earlier. That portion will remain free. And then there's an earlier session, which is 8 o'clock until 8:20 or 8:30. Currently, where the local authority provides these clubs, we charge £1 for them. We are proposing to increase that to £2. It's worth mentioning that the breakfasts themselves remain free, and people in receipt of free school meals will also be exempt from the charge. And our contribution to the Education Achievement Service, in line with other local authorities who use the EAS, we are proposing to reduce our contribution to them by 10%. Moving on to our social care budget, this is predicted to increase by 5.8% next year. It sounds like a lot, but it's not enough to cover the increased costs that this directorate's facing, and so we're proposing a number of changes within social care. The biggest one in terms of value is a staffing review. Now, we currently carry a number of vacancies within our social care directorate. It's our plan to formalise these vacancies, and therefore that cost will be removed from our books, and to make sure that those hours are picked up by the existing staff as they currently are. So it's just a continuation and I guess a formalising of the existing position. And then where we've got highly trained social workers, it's our proposal to I guess be a bit smarter with how we deploy them in terms of making sure that we're matching the tasks up to the skill level that our staff have got. So where we've got very highly skilled social workers, that we target them with the work that requires that level of skill, and then where there may be tasks that don't need such a high level of skill, we use social care assessors to conduct those tasks, just to make sure we're using our staff resources in the most efficient way possible. Changes in adult social care practice and children's services practice, and this is just making sure that we're right-sizing the care packages that we can for the individuals that receive this care, really focusing on re-ablement and working with communities in order to support people to try and make sure that we're getting that right. And then the last line is an increase in fees and charges. And again, it's worth noting that these fees and charges are means tested and are subject to financial assessment, so only those that have the ability to pay do pay, and that will continue. Communities budget, which concerns many of the things that this committee scrutinises, so waste, highways, transport and housing. It's proposing to increase that by 6.3%. It's quite a large percentage increase, but you'll remember from that pie chart that actually in terms of cash terms, it's not as much as we're going to see going into social care and health. Garden waste collection, we committed last year to put this service on a footing where it covers its own costs, and it's our proposal this year to increase the cost of that service by 10%, which will realise that ambition and mean that that service covers its own costs. Food waste bag provision, currently you can pick up the small clear plastic bags from our hubs, which you can use in the food waste caddies. We're proposing adding a charge to these, a cost charge. I think it'll be about £1, which you'll be able to pick up from our hubs and some stores. But again, it's worth noting that kind of any waste plastic bag, like a bread bag you've got around your house, you can use. You can use those in your food waste caddies as well. A cessation of the lease of the council car. Home to school transport. Again, this is one of those areas where we are stepping into a market that's not working very well for us. So currently we have a large number of taxis that come pick up children. We're a rural county, as you all know. There's some long distances to get to school. So we use some taxis to take some children to school in some parts of the county. Often those taxis have to travel a very long way even to get to the pupil's house and to take them to school, and then travel a very long way back to their base. So we're proposing investing in some minibuses in order to bring that service in-house, which will reduce the cost of that transport to the council. An increase in planning fees by 25%, and on this line it's worth noting that this requires legislation in order to allow us to do this. So currently there is a risk that we will not be able to realise this. Car parking. In our car parks where we currently charge, we are proposing to increase the parking charges by 10%. And trade waste, we are proposing to increase the trade waste fees and the sales of bags and bins. And I think here it's worth noting that there are new regulations coming in for trade waste to encourage further recycling, within industry in Wales. And that this trade waste increase has been pitched that if If you're able to recycle effectively as a business, then the increase that you should see for the same volume of waste should be, in the tens of pounds. It very much will be a small increase. And then homelessness, again, I think this is a very innovative way that we're looking to save costs within our homelessness area. We currently have a number of people in temporary accommodation in bed and breakfasts and some small hotels. It's very expensive. The accommodation in some instances is perhaps not at the standard that we would prefer it to be. So where we've got council assets and where council assets become available, it's our proposal to use those as temporary accommodation to, in order to support people, back into permanent accommodation. And I think this is an opportunity here, to link that up with the wraparound services that we can provide in order to support those people to get back into permanent accommodation. So I really think this is going to be a positive change. Mon Life, we're proposing to decrease the Mon Life budget by 3.2% next year, with further savings in closing 2 museums for an additional day a week. The cafe at the old station in Tinton, we're proposing to close that for 1 day a week, which will be a Monday, except for bank holidays where we will keep it open, in order to cope with the additional demand. MCC currently contribute £10,000 to, Abergavenny Tourist Information Centre. It's our proposal to remove that contribution, but I'm pleased to say that Bannow-Brycheiniog National Park Authority and the Abergavenny Town Council will be bridging that gap, so the Tourist Information Centre won't see a reduction in its income. Outdoor Adventure, you'll know that we've got our Outdoor Education Centre at Gilwern. Currently, a number of schools from outside our authority use that facility for their outdoor education. I'm sure you'll be aware that generally around the country the provision for outdoor education has been reduced, which has meant that there is, as a result of that, increased demand for our outdoor education centre, which we are, obviously only too happy to hire out to these groups, and we're proposing to increase the fees which we charge, which will allow a greater cost recovery for our outdoor education centre, and also try and co-locate some services at the Gilwern Centre as well in order to reduce costs. The leisure centres, we're proposing to change their closing times such that they close half an hour earlier on weekdays and an hour and a half earlier on weekends. So that'll be 9:30 on a weekday and 4:30 on a weekend. It was erroneously reported that they were going to open later, but I'm pleased to say that's not the case. They will open as they currently do, which is 6:15 in the morning. And then there's a £120,000 saving proposed with regards to changing the area management structure within Mon Life. Our resources budget, this is proposed to increase by 6.3% next year, but we've got some good news there in that we've seen an improvement in the rental income in this portfolio. We've got new tenancy agreements which have increased the income. And then on to council tax. It's our proposal to increase council tax by 7.5%, which will add, on an average Band D property, nearly £10 a month. It's worth saying that our Band D, our council tax bill for a Band D property, if you look across Wales, is about the middle of the pack. But this would provide £5.4 million of funds, and when we look back through the other slides, about really some of the tough decisions we're having to take in some areas. This £5.4 million is really protecting a lot of these valuable services. There's a lot that we are not doing in this budget. You know, we are not closing any recycling centres, we're not shutting any leisure centres permanently, we're keeping all of our hubs open, and really, and on top of that, our waste collections, we're not making any changes to the frequency of our waste collections, and really this additional funding that this council tax rise will generate is allowing us to do that. And on top of that, you will remember from the last full council meeting when we debated the CTRS scheme. We have the CTRS scheme. We have a number of other discounts available to those, such as those you know, living alone or students, which will provide help for council tax. So we'll finish talking about the revenue budget with just an assessment of the risks. We saw last year that our social care budget especially exceeded our planned budget for that area. It's a risk, I would say, we're still carrying. We know that the demand in this sector is very volatile. You know, we've obviously used the best information available to build into this budget. However, it's worth identifying that there are risks to this budget. I also touched on the planning. You know, there's £98,000 in this for an increase in planning fees, which will require legislative change. If that doesn't happen, that's also a risk to this budget. And a line there to mention that because our revenue reserves have got to a level, they're still above the minimum recommended level for revenue reserves, but we felt it would be prudent to not use them for this revenue budget, in order that they are there for their proper purpose to mitigate against risk. So our capital programme, which oversees road maintenance, schools, leisure centres and our farms. So we're going to continue to support our priorities in the community and corporate plan with our capital programme. And really try and target the longer-term challenges in our communities. And I'm sure you're all aware of the new Abergavenny 3 to 19 school that's currently being constructed, and also the new care home at Crick Road, which represents significant investments for this council. And we are in the middle of 4 weeks of public consultation. We had a number of consultation meetings last week. We have had and will continue to have a number this week and also into next week. And I'd encourage all members and members of the public, if they're watching, to you know, spread the word about these meetings. Come and share your views. There's also an online survey, which, you know, this budget is stronger when we have people's feedback as you know, as to what they think of it and what they think of where we're placing our priorities. So thank you. I'll end the presentation there, and I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carar. Officers, did you want to come in there, or are you happy to go to members' questions?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very happy to respond as and when needed as questions arise. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. So, members, the raise hand facility is in the chat. So, first of all, we have Councillor Brin.
Diolch yn fawr, Councillor Carar, for that presentation. I noticed you asked residents to attend face-to-face meetings. Can you tell me where we'll find the information on that to start off with before I go into my questions?
Sure. There's two face-to-face meetings we're having this year. They're both in Usk, and there's a daytime session and an evening session. The daytime session is at 10 a.m. next Wednesday, and the evening session is, I believe, at 6 p.m. next Thursday. All the details are on the website, along with the details of the online sessions, although I think the last online session is this evening. We've already held two, and there's links to the survey. All of the sessions we've done, they've been recorded, so the recordings are available, so if you just want to go and see the presentation and get the answers to any questions that have been asked, you're welcome to do that. And on top of that, any questions that we've had, we've put them in an FAQ section on the website. So all the questions we've had as a result of the consultation, we've published those, we've answered those, and as those questions come in, we'll continue to do that. So even if maybe you can't attend one of the consultations, it's always worth sending in a question. We will answer the question, and you'll be able to find those answers. Thank you for the question.
Diolch yn fawr. Okay, my questions are, I note that car parking costs are at 66,000 and that proposals are to increase car parking charges and permits by 10% to soften the blow of increases. The plan for garden waste collection is ensure that services undertake full cost recovery, but I understand car parks are still running at a loss. Might it be pertinent to add a detail of the continued shortfall or information documentation discussed with residents, as I don't think people always appreciate that the burden of car parking costs, as with everything else, falls upon us. Equally, can we be informed if the trade waste costs will now break even with the proposed increases, and how this affects schools? How many schools currently use us to manage the waste, and how many use outside contractors? And how do you think that the planned national changes for workforce recycling in April will affect the services and the income that we receive? I was pleased to see that we're not going to be spending public money on plastic bags to produce plastic bags that would then just get thrown away for food waste. But I do wonder if we need to provide residents with further information on what they can use as alternatives, such as bread bags and plastic food bags, which we're usually drowning in at home anyway, to make sure that they are totally clear about what they can and can't do. And is it possible to assess the impact of this cut in several months' time, just to assess if there is now an increase in food waste found in the general waste following this withdrawal, because we wouldn't want that to happen. And still on the subject of waste, can you tell me if we are receiving any cashback on saleable waste products produced as part of the waste incineration process? And finally, can I get a little more detail on what you think of the drivers pushing up costs for school transport? I know you mentioned taxis in part of your briefing. I just wondered how it was that we are managing to avoid these and making it cheaper by bringing it in-house, and wondered if we're planning on electrifying our bus services and if money has been set aside to invest in reducing the carbon of our home fleet. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Councillor Brin. Councillor Carar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for those questions, Councillor Brin. There's a lot there. I'll pick up on a couple of points, if that's okay, that I'd like to handle, and then hand over to the officers who might be able to provide a little bit more detail for you. So on the car parks, I'll bring in Mark Hand in just a sec to support with that, but I think it's worth remembering that we are a very rural county and a lot of people have to commute into our towns to work. So it's always a balance between, trying to make sure that, we are not like really encouraging car use where people can walk and cycle, but also not penalising those who don't have the choice but to use a car and to come into our towns. And I know our business community feel very strongly about, encouraging people into our towns rather than people going off to Cwmbran where there's free parking, for example. So I think it is a very nuanced area. It's our intention to hold a car parking review in the next 12 months where we will look at our whole car park estate across the county, how it interacts with each other, the charges across that estate and how they work together. But to add a bit more detail, I'll bring in Mark Hand if that's okay.
Morning, thanks Councillor Carar, thanks Chair. Can you hear me okay? I never know if I'm shouting or too quiet on these.
Yeah,
okay, thanks. Thanks, Chair. So yeah, in terms of the car parking charges, there's various costs involved with the car parking service, which relate to things like business rates, general maintenance, credit card transactions, and civil enforcement, which is all linked. Although, as you'll be aware, civil enforcement looks at on-street parking offences as well as people parking and paying within our car parks. So parking within bays and having bought a ticket and the like. In fact, the car parking charges cover those costs and feed into the wider highways budget as well. So that income is used to help maintain the highways. It's the overall highways budget that's got the shortfall. In the report, you'll have seen there's some elements there of charges. So the 10% increase in car parking charges itself raises more than the 68,000 or 66,000 that's shown as a saving, and that's because there's some behind the scenes expenses. So credit card transactions are charges for those are going up, rates for car parks, and costs of delivering the civil enforcement service. So I think it's those bits combined, Councillor Brin, that are the shortfall that you're talking about. But overall, car parking charges contribute towards the wider highway service, if that helps and makes sense.
Okay, Councillor Brin, are you happy with that response?
So, yeah, just to make it clear, so that as far as car parks themselves are concerned, they are breaking even.
Yeah, that's right. But it's all linked to the wider highways budget and highways improvements and investments, which is where the financial challenge lies.
Okay, thank you. And then who is going to answer Councillor Brin's questions on waste? Oh, welcome, Carl. Do you want to come in here?
Thanks, Councillor. There was a couple of questions from Councillor Brin on this. So trade waste first. We've got the majority of the smaller schools, the primary schools. We don't have any of the comprehensive schools on our trade waste service at the moment. The new regs coming in apply to everybody, so every single business, every school, every premises that's a workplace. We don't know what the impact of that will be yet. We've got a scheme set up. It's built into this year's prices. We are trying to manage it so that businesses that fully recycle are not charged any more than they're currently paying. It's quite difficult with small businesses because they use so little amount of the waste service. So we're trying to get a balanced approach with it. We've got a small business price deal for all small businesses, and that gives them all of the services that they need. So we've tried to be as fair as possible. The trade waste breaks even at the moment. We're not sure whether it'll continue to break even with the trade waste recycling being pushed on and what impact that will have on our customer base. But as I said, we've tried to manage it in the most effective way that supports our businesses and encourages recycling. So we've got all of the prices out to the businesses that are on our customer base, and we've recently just sent out to a lot of other businesses as well. So I think we're pretty covered there. The food waste, as Councillor Brin suggested, we're very nervous that not providing food waste bags is going to see a reduction in the amount of food waste that is put out for collection. We actively encourage already that people should be using different types of bags, different types of plastic bags, but across the board we're seeing on average every household using 4 of our bags per week. That's the kind of numbers that we're talking about. So we're not sure of the impact. We will definitely be reviewing it throughout the year to see if there is a negative impact on the amount of food waste that we collect. We don't have to lose a lot of food waste into the black bag for this to be a negative turnaround on a budget saving. So we're very conscious of that, but it is the right thing to do. We should be discouraging the use of single-use plastic bags across the board. So, you know, it's a difficult balance, but one that we are quite nervous of and will certainly be reviewing over the next 3 months. The energy from waste plant in Cardiff that takes our waste, we do get revenue back for the recycler that goes through the system, particularly the metal waste that goes through the system. We get a cash back as part of Project Worth, and the recent expansion of the site down there to take in more material, produce more energy, and they currently move into a combined heat and energy production unit, which gives them more efficiency. We also get money back from that. So we get a rebate against our costs within the contract. I don't have the figures with me right now, but if members would like to see what that is, I'm happy to provide them. Hopefully I've covered all of Councillor Brin's questions, but I was writing and couldn't keep up.
I think on the waste you have. Just a supplementary question for me on the food waste bags. Are there other local authorities that are doing this, Carl, just out of interest?
There's been a few in England that has moved. Caerphilly has just done the opposite to what we're doing and started providing free food waste bags, partly because they're so far behind on their recycling figures. We're in a strong position on recycling figures. Quarter three this year was 72.8%. So we're in front of the target, but you know, we don't want to be complacent about that.
Yeah.
We need everybody on board with us. There was a council in Northern Ireland that introduced chargeable bags and it didn't go particularly well, but I haven't got all the detail on that, councillor. So it's something that we're looking at, something that we're going to keep an eye on, and obviously as we find out more information, we'll be feeding into this process as well.
Okay, thank you, Carl. And who's going to answer the questions with regards to school taxi service for Councillor Brin?
I can do that, Chair, if that's okay.
Of course. Welcome, Deborah.
Morning. So in terms of our home to school transport, we have a process where we have externally commissioned fleet, and we also undertake our own operational fleet. We recently retendered all of the external contracts back in July of this year. So all of the external contracts have now been tendered and awarded. What we find is that the external market is quite fragile. And on a number of occasions, we had no bids at all. So when we go back out to the market, if we get one or two bids there, or even one on some of those occasions, what we're finding is they're very high. So the costs associated with home to school transport increase year on year. Partly that's down to the state of the external operating market. Partly that's due to the fact that they themselves are having increasing costs resulting from increase in driver costs, supply parts, maintenance and fuel, all of which they look to recharge back to us as part of their tender figure. The proposal we have in terms of the small fleet is we have 109 contracts that are operated by vehicles which are 8 seats or less. And what we're proposing is to take the highest cost contracts and look at internalising those. And we've looked at the cost of the external provision versus the internal provision, and we would only propose to take those contracts which are higher than the if they're undertaken externally than they would be undertaken internally. We don't just operate on our own when we actually do tenders. We are in a collaboration with Newport and Turbine. We make sure that we go out to the market at the same time so that we are not competing with each other. But the costs are very reflective of the very challenging market that our external operators are also working within, with all the issues around the bus reform. So we monitor. We also continually review our contracts to find opportunities to go back to the market and see if there is anyone else that might have bought a new vehicle, someone else who might have moved into the market, so that we can actually reduce those costs. And we review that on weekly, monthly basis. In terms of our fleet, we are in the process of converting our fleet and transitioning our fleet, not just the passenger transport, but also in the wider operational fleet. 8% of the overall operational fleet is now ULEV. We have 24 electric vehicles in our wider operational fleet and 10 hybrid. We don't have a budget to support fleet transition. Any fleet transition has to operate within our existing revenue budgets. But what we do is continually work with organisations such as Welsh Government Energy Service to identify when there are grants being made available, and we apply for those grants, which are generally the gap funding between a fossil fueled vehicle and an electric equivalent. So we are continually reviewing our costs. We will always look to reduce them, but it is very much, the costs are very much reflective of the market that we are working within. I hope that answers the questions.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah.
Councillor Brin, you're happy with that? Okay, so next we had Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I got a number of questions. Some have arisen from the questions that have previously been asked. On the home, just to come back on the home to school transport, if you're doing eight-seater or less journeys, how will this affect additional learning needs pupils, because of the fact that obviously out of county special needs go out of county, and will it extend the journey beyond what's reasonable? Because if you go around and picking up more pupils, it's going to take longer to get to and from school. On coming back on the car parking matter, obviously this is going to affect the town centres in terms of our sustainability of car parking charges increases, and I've noticed that there tends to be a knock-on effect when we increase our charges to the use of supermarket car parks, and actually they've reduced the hours in Chepstow. For example, M&S car park is currently 1 hour rather than 2 hours, and the Tesco car park is now 2 hours rather than 3 hours. Now, when the supermarket, like a large Tesco, was built, the idea is that it links into town and doesn't take trade away from town. So I don't know whether there's any planning conditions in terms of probably not, but the principle is that there should be a link between the supermarkets not taking trade off the town centres, and I just wondered if there's any planning issues on that. On homelessness, we were told that some of the council assets were being possibly used, and I just wondered what these were. I don't know what the status of the old Sevenview care home is and whether or not there's any accommodation available there. In terms of looking at recycling, I've looked at the cost pressures on recycling. I wanted to ask a few questions of Carl on that. In the page 50 of the general budget document, it says that there's a 1,009,000 pressure, and mentions 600k in the description there, but it doesn't an annual cost of instead of expected due to recycling, but it then says about the contracts, and we're not clear what it mentions the amount of the contracts, but we're not clear why it's increased so much. In terms of transport cost pressure, it says 200k, and I wondered, it says rising cost of fuel hire, parts and maintenance. I appreciate maintenance might have increased, but fuel costs are actually declining. In terms of the garden waste, when we looked at that last year, and there was quite a substantial increase, we did find that effectively we were told that there was probably going to be some spare, they were overestimating. So I'd like to know why there's a 10% increase in the charge there. The other question I've got in looking at the cost pressures are basically, if you look at page 52 of the general budget explanatory document on cost pressures, it mentions administration of council tax premiums, and it says there's a cost pressure of 128,000, but it says this will be funded from the income generated from premiums. Now, I would have thought that if you were charging so much extra for council tax premiums, for example, in relation to second homes, which may impact the tourist industry, that actually we would have a positive budget issue as a result, rather than it being cost neutral. So I'd like to know a bit more about that and why it isn't cost neutral. It is cost neutral in the sense that the costs might be recovered, but I would have expected that we would have actually increased our revenue as a result, and if we aren't, this begs the question of why are we doing it. Then the other question I've got is about the council tax settlement that we got on the provisional settlement. It was 2.3%, but the average for local authorities in Wales was 3.1%. And I noticed that the appendix to the Cabinet report the cabinet member didn't mention that we would have been, he's mentioned previously he was disappointed at the settlement, but he didn't actually mention anything about the fact that we got a lower than average settlement when our finances are so pushed. But the other question I've got is, are we, both from the officer and the cabinet level, are we really pushing the Welsh Government in terms of getting extra funding? And the reason I say this is because there was an article on the 24th of January, a BBC Wales article, which says Wales gets extra 25 million from English Council funding boost, and Plaid Cymru was arguing that this should be given to rural councils and actually increase the funding floor level from 2% to 3%. And I'd like to know what extra consultation we've had with the Welsh Government on making sure that we get our funding level to at least the average type of level. I mean, some of those questions are obviously for Peter Davies as well, but obviously if there's more money going, we want to get our fair share of it. And obviously some councils, have had an increase of like 4.7%. I mean, the 3.1% is just average, and we've got very few reserves which we can't draw on, whereas other councils have got a lot more reserves. So it's not just about the money that Wales gets from the UK government, it's about how they decide to distribute those funds, and I don't really think we're getting a fair share of that, and I want to know what we're going to actually do about that. I mean, in terms of council tax and the rises that are going to happen of 7.5%, there was some tables from the Welsh Government that showed on average Monmouthshire paid about £2,192 in council tax compared to the average for local authorities in Wales, which was about £1,600. So I know there's quite a lot of questions there, but I hope you'll be able to go through them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Carar, do you want to make a start?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Brown. There was a lot of questions there. I will take the ones that I feel I'm able to take to the start, and for the more technical issues, we'll bring in officers. I think Councillor Griffiths, Paul Griffiths as well, is going to come in as well and take some of them. I'll start with the second homes premium and the cost recovery of that. There is a cost associated with administering that second home council tax premium. We list it as a cost because it is a cost, but the projected income generated from that scheme is more than that cost, so it's more than breaking even, and the additional funds that it creates are being earmarked to support our homelessness agenda in terms of the costs going in order to try and reduce homelessness. The difference off the top of my head is probably, I want to say, around £400,000. But yeah, we can bring in John as well. He'll have the specific data around that. But to cover off the other point about the Welsh Government settlement, he mentioned, I've expressed my disappointment with our settlement. I am disappointed with it. The average across Wales was 3.1%. The changes in the Welsh Government settlement have been driven by population changes. So our population has not increased as much as other local authorities in Wales. If our population had have increased, we would have got more funding. It's that simple. However, it's something we're keen to press on, is that actually this is the case for many rural authorities where our populations are getting older, our younger population is getting smaller, our population growth is very low, but the cost of delivering our services remains, and in fact we have specific challenges in delivering our services in being a rural county, especially with regards to the distances we have to cover to provide those services and our public transport networks. You mentioned about additional funding going to English councils. I'm pleased that the penny has finally dropped somewhere that local authorities need more money. We are expecting a consequential to come to Wales as a result of that, and we are lobbying hard. I'm sorry?
The article said an extra 25 million.
Yeah, that's the number that's been talked about. We're expecting that to come through to local authorities, and we are lobbying at the moment in order to try and maximise Monmouthshire's benefit from that. You know, you mentioned about the 3% funding floor. That's one option, which helps kind of level that playing field. The funding floor for the initial settlement, I'm sure you'll be aware, was 2%, and that actually propped up the budgets of a number of North Wales counties who have a similar problem in they are being rural and that their population has not been growing as strongly as some other areas. What's that? £600,000 is the net income on the council tax premiums, I've been informed. So, based on the current modelling, so that's, you take that £120,000 and there's still £600,000 after that's been accounted for.
Sorry, do you mean that if you went from 2.3% to 3%, then it would be about 600k?
No, that was just coming back on the council tax, the second home premiums.
All right. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I thought you were talking about the change. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the funding that we might get, you know, we're looking at probably a maximum figure of around £800,000. You know, and when we look at the numbers involved in this budget, I mean, don't get me wrong, we would really, really like that funding because it would, you know, it would really help us protect our services. But when you look at this £20 million, actually, as a percentage, it's, you know, it's a sticking plaster rather than a solution, is how I would describe it, because we know these problems are going to be continuing.
Sorry, when will we find out if the 25 million as a whole, whether we'll get any extra on that? Thank you.
We're hoping to find out before we finalise our budget. It's not certain yet when we're going to find out, but that's our hope, so we can use it to calculate for the next year. I think that would be the expectation of most local authorities in Wales as well, in order that they can use that money to set their budgets for next year. If it's okay, I'll bring in Councillor Paul Griffiths, who's going to be able to help on some of your other questions, and then we'll move on to the officers. Is that okay?
Lovely, thank you.
Chair, shall I come in now?
Yes, sorry.
Just picking up on the point of Councillor Brown relating to the proposed savings on the homelessness line in our budget as a proposed saving of 400,000. As members are aware, there are substantial costs associated with the provision we make for homeless persons, in particular the costs in purchasing spaces in hotels in various parts of the county, and the partnership we've had with those hotel owners is one that we have valued and benefit has been gained. What we are considering is the potential for using space in assets which become otherwise redundant in the county, so that we can transfer, where appropriate, people from that hotel accommodation to alternative, more cost-effective accommodation. As Councillor Brown indicates, one of those most obvious options would be the spaces in the Seven View residential home, as the new residential home becomes available later in the year. We are thoroughly testing that as an option, but it is not a concluded decision at this stage. Thank you.
Councillor Griffiths, just on that, are you looking into any other council-owned properties then to help with this issue?
That's the specific one, but we are scanning widely. Yeah.
Okay. Could you confirm whether or not you're looking at county farms?
The There is no county farm as such, which as a farm would be appropriate for homelessness accommodation. There are individual properties on county farms which become vacant, and on a case-by-case basis, we look at their appropriateness for our housing need. And that's just, I think, a sensible thing to do. The numbers involved are very small, and they would not lead to a major shift from hotel accommodation.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Who would like to pick up car parking and planning? Louise's questions.
Yeah, I think it was car parking and recycling. Yeah.
Recycling. Sorry.
Yeah, Chair, I'm happy to do that if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
So I guess two elements to the question. In terms of the parking increases, Councillor Brown, I think the concept of whether or not charges impact on high street health isn't proven. There is no clear evidence, but that's something that'll be looked at as part of the car parking review. And if you're aware of any evidence, that can be signposted to us in advance, and we can start looking at that. But the jury is out on that regard from research I've looked at previously. But in terms of your question about the private car parks, how much a business charges on its land wouldn't be a land use planning consideration. That would just simply be a competition issue, or how they use their land from a private landowner's interest. So there wouldn't be any planning conditions controlling how much a business can charge for parking on its own private land, unfortunately.
Chair, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Peter. Councillor Brown, I think all your questions have been answered, so if you're happy to move on.
I think, sorry, the recycling ones, waiting for those. I asked for.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I think Carl's here to come in, and I think Deb is to come in behind Carl, therefore, to respond to, I think, other, some remaining questions regarding home-to-school transport.
Home-school transport, yeah. Okay.
If I cover the budget pressure increase in contract costs first, so it goes back to 21-22. We were seeing a reasonable level of income coming from the recycling material that we were sending out in 21-22, which brought in an income of around £500,000 in the first 3 quarters of that year. In the last quarter of that year, we've seen a massive drop in the recycling values. At the same time, we're going into last year's budget pressures as well. Challenging budget last year. We took the decision to stay with an income base coming in from the recycling going into 22-23, and it carried on from the last 3 quarters. We've seen a massive cost increase in the recycling, reprocessing, and no money coming back through the value of that recycling. So it was a double whammy. We've gone from an income to zero to an expenditure. So the gap is exacerbated by the fact that we'd hoped for an income-based budget off the back of the recycling. We are looking to roll out the polyprop bags over the next few months. We're going back out for a new contract. We're hoping that we will see some reduction in those costs, but the value of recycling is at a 5 or 6 year low. At one point, 4 or 5 years ago, we were paying nearly £1 million a year to have our recycling treated. 21-22, we were seeing an income of 500,000. So the swing in recycling market is massive. It's very volatile. It's very difficult to budget for that and to plan for it, because we're at the behest of the market forces rather than anything we can do as a council. What we do know is higher quality recycling through the polyprop bags will increase the value of recycling, and that is the direction that we are moving into. The garden waste increase 10%. Last year's budget, £50 per bin, was based on a drop-off in garden waste customers. Everything that we had through the consultation told us that 33% of the customer base was going to fall off because they weren't willing to step up to £50. We have to base it on the best evidence we have. Actually, that didn't happen. We had 95% of the customers stayed with us. Every customer that we have increases our cost base, and when it gets over a threshold, we need another vehicle. It just increases costs. It's a very difficult thing for us to accurately show. We were confident at the beginning of last year that we were on target. We agreed to collect Christmas trees in December, which also obviously costs us money as well. But it was just the lack of drop off in the customer base, and in some areas an increase, which meant we needed an additional vehicle, and all of a sudden we need extra money to make the scheme break even. Hopefully this year it'll break even. We'll get the numbers right. Every year that we do this, we get a slightly more accurate figure going into the next year, and hopefully we won't see such a big increase going into next year.
Could I just come in, Chair, just very quickly? Yeah, thank you for the response on that. I just wondered on the charging on the food waste bags. I mean, I know that you can use, for example, plastic bags that come from loaves of bread, or, from pea bags or whatever, but I'm not sure that the general public actually knows that. So is it possible to have some sort of press release or advertising of that, so that people will know that, for example, I don't know whether they can use sort of like a plastic bag that you use for shopping and that sort of thing. So I know you can use the loaf bags and so forth, but it would be helpful to let the public know that there is an alternative to basically help with food waste recycling. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brin. Deborah, I understand you're going to come back in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There was some questions around home to school transport in terms of whether the proposal would detrimentally impact on those individuals that have ALN transport. Hopefully I can reassure Councillor Brown that that is not the case. We are not proposing to change the routes or the journeys of this mandate. What we're actually proposing is to change the operator. So we will become the provider rather than an external contractor. And in terms of the question regarding the cost of fleet is very much exposed to the external market. It relies on supply chains, it relies on parts and goods, it also relies on the fuel, but it also has other issues around the age of the vehicles and coming out of warranty. So for instance, some of our costs are now due to the age of our fleet. For instance, our refuse collection vehicles are now coming out of warranty. When a gearbox goes, which it has done on a number of those vehicles recently, there is a cost of £30,000 to the authority each time that happens, which wasn't happened when they were in the extended warranty period. So there is a combination of factors that are impacting on the increase in costs associated with fleet. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. I'll take Councillor Lucas and then Councillor Howarth and Councillor Strong, and then I'll let Councillor Howarth come in. Thank you.
Morning all, thank you ever so much for all the presentations so far. I have some questions on the budget and lots of sub-questions having listened to lots of others. One of my main questions actually, or my main thoughts having done my reading of, is there's absolutely no mention in the budget of highways. Why? I don't understand. It's one of the biggest parts of our budget, and yet we don't seem to have any notion of what's being spent, what, where, or why. There's no breakdown, there's nothing about budget. I don't understand for highways, yet we have huge amount. So for example, the Wye Bridge, we have all sorts of things going on, yet we don't have any information about that. Could we please, why is it not there? Moving on from that, lots of stuff that's already been spoken of. So in reference to the leisure centres closing down for some would say a small amount of time. I've had at least half a dozen emails from residents complaining bitterly about particularly the Sunday afternoon early closures, and yet because the reason that one resident in particular gave for the badminton club, this is in Monmouth Leisure Centre, I should add, is that, and which is by far according to the graph, the highest used leisure centre in Monmouthshire. So one of the thoughts that came through from that lady was her badminton club had to be moved to a Sunday when the school got access to the leisure centre facilities, yet now it's can't use the daytime slot because the school's using it, yet they can't use any other night because there's no other time for them. So they're going to miss and disband their badminton club because of that time change. And if we think about wealth and well-being and all those thoughts of mental well-being and activity, it's a concern that we're actually, even though we're supposing only closing for half an hour, everybody, and if you look at the graph, it's logical that the graph finishes going down as the time cuts out. But by moving it back by half an hour, that graph's going to be completely repeated next year, but exactly the same, but half an hour earlier. So we're going to go next year, we're going to close it again half an hour earlier. And so surely, we're going to end up with our leisure centres being closed so early. For me, if anything, I would argue the case we should be opening it for longer to get more people there. Especially when we've just advertised, by the way, to increase our revenue by getting more members to it. It defeats the object somewhat. And then when we go on from that, I am very concerned about that. When we go on from that, we talk about the tourism. The information I've just read on the Cabinet report sort of contradicts what we're talking about doing on our budget costs. So, for example, we're talking about closing Tinton, particularly, and the two museums for 1 day a week, except for bank holidays. Well, if you're a tourist, you're confused by that for start off, because that might seem sensible in some ways, but you might choose to go on holiday to avoid the bank holidays because that's when all the kids are going to be there if you're of a certain demographic of age. So you might think, well, why is it closed that day? And it's very confusing. How do you know where, what, where? So why are we, for such a small amount of money, why are we doing that? And when you read on page 23 of the report that's just about to go to Cabinet, we've had an increase of 3.7 in growth, visitors up by 2.3, an increase of full-time jobs by 7.6%, and yet we're about to close some of the very things that we want our visitors to come to. And if you're a B&B or a self-catering, a tourist industry main store, you want to advertise for those residents, your visitors, to go to these places, yet we go and close them. It doesn't add up. We want this increase to go on, all these figures to improve, yet we're going to go and change some of these very important visitor attractions that we need, which then takes us on to parking. So when we talk about the public car parking charges, I've got to be honest, if it was up to me, we wouldn't be having parking charges. It will all be free. It would be the way of allowing our towns to grow, assuming that that's not possible. I understand Mark Hand saying that it's from Councillor Brin's question that the car parking charges are I think the phrase he used was it's not a cost, that it breaks even. Well, surely it doesn't break even. It actually produces money. I must be me, but must do. But for our town, in particular Monmouth, with all the works that are going on, I've had a resident ask me and write to me, and actually she wasn't in my ward, but she's written to me personally, saying that the car parking charges for Monmouth currently, due to all the upset that we're going through, should be actually removed from the main car park in order to allow our shops to survive. And I think that's a very valid question. Should we not be looking at that? But that might be out of this particular fear of questioning, but I'd like to thought about it. So yeah, charges on increased charging for car parks has a direct effect on our footfall and our visitors and our ordinary people that live in our surrounding area that come into our towns to come to us, because as Councillor Carar just said, they go to Bren rather than to us, and we need our shops to survive, don't we? At least I think we do. I really want to support my hometown, and I worry about this dramatically, and so are our shops. They are petrified, particularly in Monmouth at the moment, of their businesses going under. And we need to do everything we can. Next question.
Councillor Lucas, can I allow Cabinet members and officers to answer those questions? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to implement a 3-question rule at a time, because it's becoming quite lengthy. Is that okay? And then we'll come back to you.
Okay, well, it's nearly over, but yeah, all right.
So, Councillor Carar, do you want to come in first?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for those questions, Councillor Lucas. I'll respond to your comments, as I remember them. You mentioned at the start about highways forming a large part of our budget. It doesn't form a large part of our budget. If I can refer you to the pie chart that I showed at the start of this presentation. Oh, it's just the lights, sorry. The lights will come back on in a sec. We're not moving enough. 2/3 of our budget are made up purely of education and social care. Highways makes up, a couple of % of our budget. It's not a large proportion of our budget. I spoke about it briefly with regards to our capital programme in terms of our maintenance programme for our roads, but I think the presentation largely deals with changes that we're making to our budget, and we are not proposing to change our highways budget. So I hope that helps you with that. Regarding the leisure centre opening times, which I suppose rolls into the museum's opening times as well, it really speaks to a broader point about this budget, where we're looking to protect those who use our services, the most vulnerable in our society. And when we're looking for ways in order to support our schools, when we're looking for ways in order to support people, receiving social care, I'm not afraid to say that actually, I think on balance, it's the right decision to close leisure centres slightly earlier in order to try and protect education, to try and protect social care spending. But setting budgets is about choices. Our museums, the ones that will close on a Monday, they will still be open for 6 days a week. If you want to go and visit the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, it's closed on a Monday. These aren't, I would say, particularly outlandish proposals in terms of just making sure that our assets are available for people to use when they most want to use them. You mentioned about that you would like to have free car parking across Monmouthshire and remove car parking charges. We currently receive a net income of £1.6 million from our car parks. I'd like to know, in your proposals to do that, where you would intend to find that £1.6 million in order to fund our services. Because
in an ideal world.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world. We live, we live in the reality that we've got, and it's a very challenging environment, and we have to make very challenging decisions. And when we make these choices, we try and make these choices around those which are going to have the least harm to our residents, and the ones that we need to support the most. This is a difficult budget to set, and I lament some of the changes in services we'll have to make. I think if we had the funding available, we would fully fund the teachers' pay increase in our schools, so we know that our children's education wouldn't be affected. We would keep the leisure centres with their current opening hours, so there's people who prefer use the pool when the leisure centres are at their quietest, that they can still do so. But in these circumstances, it just doesn't seem like the prudent thing to do. So I'm happy to defend the choices that we've made so far with the money that we've got available. I know with that answer I didn't specifically pick up your points about the various things, but I think it's the underlying theme that really answers all of those questions together, and I hope it's helpful.
Thank you.
Are you happy to take that response for all of your questions?
Oh, well, I accept lots of the thoughts, but I do concern myself, particularly with the rise of 20% on the car parking, that is going to have an effect on our towns. And that really does worry me for our shops, that we want our independent shops to survive, and they're not going to. And that's a huge concern. And I don't see that by doing this, it seems it's little by little, and at what point does it all stop?
Okay.
There is another question, if I may.
Okay, quickly, if you can.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask about the buses, really, the bus services. We've just gone out to tender, but we did have e-buses, and we've gone out to tender. It's great that we're going to improve our services for the majority of it all from the tender. What will happen to all the e-buses, please, that we bought?
Councillor Carar, are you okay to answer this?
I think we'll bring in Deb, if that's okay.
Deb. Okay, Deb.
Would you mind if I just clarify what you mean by e-buses? Are you referring to the electric buses that Monmouthshire use? Right, yeah, okay. So what we will do is reutilise the buses that we will not be using on scheduled bus services. We will be still running some scheduled bus services as a Monmouthshire operator, but those that are no longer being run, for instance, on some of the services in the south, will now be reallocated to home to school and grassroots.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And Cabinet Member Councillor Griffiths also put in the chat the proposed increase in car parking charges is 10%, not 20%, for information. Next, we've got Councillor Strong and then Councillor Howarth.
Thank you, Chair. I think Officer Deb Hillhouse has actually just answered my question, because one of my questions was around the changes to home to school transport and the addition of new vehicles, and I did wonder whether, if you're having more in-house journeys, whether there might be the scope for some of those vehicles to be used for grassroots. This time last year we were looking at increased charges for grassroots travel. I'm really welcome that that won't be happening this year, and we've seen the value of community transport. But can I have some clarification about the number of vehicles that will be replaced and whether they might be utilised for sort of community transport? But the main question that I've got is around homelessness, and actually I think it's really to be welcomed that we're looking at ways of reducing individuals and families in what is unsuitable accommodation in B&Bs and the rest of it. But I'm really quite concerned that if we're looking to, some of the council assets that will no longer be in use, that we are looking to repurpose these for homeless people, and it might not be suitable accommodation. What we don't want to happen is to have mini institutions in each of our towns, and I really do worry that if we're saying that the Seven View care facility is not fit for purpose for older residents with dementia, then we're saying that it's okay for homeless people. It's a big building, and what I would prefer is that we would have decent homes for people that are leaving B&B and homelessness support, and that we really look at that in a more sort of detailed way. And I also want to ask the question and I don't know, before I got onto the council, the costs of the provision of of the building at Crick and the new provision for Seven View Centre, was that dependent on selling Seven View for housing? So if it was, then we need to look at that really carefully. So I know that it's kind of a bit off budget, but I think it's really important questions that we need to ask. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Councillor Callard, shall I go to Councillor Griffiths as we've got him on the meeting for the answers regarding homelessness and the Seven View care home? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think Councillor Griffiths is still in the meeting.
Okay, lovely.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair, and thank Councillor Strong for the question. I'll provide an answer and then look to our Director, Peter Davis, to provide further background. The creation of the new residential home is funded in part by borrowing and in part by a contribution of the County Council. That contribution comes from a fund that the County Council holds of capital receipts that it has had in the past. That form of funding will still take place. Should we use the existing Seven View residential home for homelessness purposes, we will be foregoing possibly around £900,000 in capital receipt. That will not be going into the fund that I've described. But if we have a revenue saving of £400,000 a year from using that building, it would be a rational decision to do so and forego the £900,000 receipt into that fund. Gaining £400,000 a year saving in order not to spend £900,000 would represent a rational decision. I think Pete Davis may be able to give more professional confirmation of that arithmetic and argument.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Griffiths. It's actually captured it very well. There's little I need to sort of add, really, just in terms of confirming the simple fact that the opportunity arises, as Councillor Griffiths has talked to in his earlier input and just now, with regards to the use of the Seven View care home, the existing one. And obviously there's clearly assessment of the future use of that building. One would hope that it provides and it proves that it and represents an asset that can be repurposed in the way that's being looked at now. And to the extent that that does become a reality, and to Councillor Griffiths' point, then we need to just look to work our capital financing around accordingly. And obviously in the interplay between our revenue and capital budgets, to the point made, is just making sure that if we are looking to, not direct what was anticipated, the capital receipt of the Seven View care home, into the makeup of the funding for the new Crick Road care home, then clearly borrowing will come into play in that regard. But obviously we'll make the adjustment in terms of borrowing costs versus savings to ensure that that is properly captured through the budget process.
Can I just come back, Chair? Oh, sorry, thank you, you're on mute, but I guess I can. Can I just say my concerns about, it's all very well saying we're going to save £400,000 for B&Bs and sort of homeless accommodation, but there will be refurbishment of that building needed, and I don't think that we can just say that all the people that are homeless in Monmouthshire will go to one place. I don't think that's acceptable, and I don't think that we should just be putting all our eggs in one basket. Thank you.
Chair. I'm not going to come back specifically to actually respond to that supplementary, but I probably would look to draw in, if not Councillor Griffiths, I think probably Kath Fallon, who I know has obviously done the level of detail work, providing the comfort and assurances into Cabinet and Cabinet members about the approach that we're looking to take. And obviously the Seven View opportunity is just one aspect of the approach that's being taken. I think members obviously in the chamber will be aware of agricultural cottages that we're looking to identify and that have the potential to be used for either response to, again, accommodation deficits within children's services or homeless as needs align. And obviously we're going further in that regard, and it's going to be a matter for consideration for council shortly at the next cycle in the children's services space. But Kath, I see you've come up. Do you want to maybe just sort of maybe talk more broadly, I guess, and to Councillor Strong's point?
And then I'll let Councillor Griffiths come back in as well. His hand is appearing, and then we'll move forward. Okay. Thank you, Kath.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, we obviously taken a rapid rehousing approach and looking very much about sustainable accommodation options. Certainly take on board Councillor Strong's comments with regard to looking at suitable accommodation. Obviously, we're looking at buildings that are spacious, where we are able to provide on-site wraparound support. It's very much about ensuring that people are in temporary accommodation for the shortest amount of time possible. We are constantly looking for alternative accommodation to move people into an environment where they feel safe and secure, and that is very much the focus of the team. It's very much centred around the person, and we will always have that at the forefront. So whilst we accept, yes, this is we'll be looking at budget savings, this is very much about what is right for the people and the residents that we're looking after. I hope that helps really in terms of that strategic approach that we're actually taking.
Thank you, Kath. And Councillor Griffiths, did you want to come back in, or was that a old hand?
No, just very, very quickly in response to Councillor Strong, important points. There is no proposal that all those people, homeless people for whom we're providing bed and breakfast, should be located in a single venue. The £400,000 saving in the budget is based on the proposal that up to around 20 may be relocated in another dwelling. That is only a fraction of the total. It would be a balanced way forward, and we wouldn't lose all other options. I think those are important points. It's not, as I said earlier, a concluded decision, because work is going on by officers just to ensure that all the costings related to the move are fully understood, the operational plan is fully in place, and only when that's done will we be able to move. There will still be significant levels of costs associated, security costs of around 300,000 a year relating to a group of that size. Those sorts of costs continue. Refurbishing costs are being identified. I just wanted to come in to not allow the impression that this was a wholesale movement of the bed and breakfast provision. It is a fraction of that provision would achieve this saving. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. And next, Councillor Howarth.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not too sure any more members of the committee want to speak before you allow me to speak, Chair.
There's no question, there's no hands up. So that's why I'm saving the best to last.
Oh, thank you, Chair. And thank you, committee members. That's I've enjoyed this morning's meeting, and thank you to officers and senior officers for their answers in the questions. It's a quick point, and then I'll get to a couple of questions I just want to follow up on. Most of them have been asked, which is really, really helpful this morning. This is probably one of the worst budgets I probably had to go through in my time as a councillor in Monmouthshire. Very, very difficult. But I'm not the administration. I'm an opposition member, and I believe that we will get through this. But, Chair, we've got too much risk. everything has got a risk with it. We've talked about this morning. If we can do this, if we can do that, everything we've talked about has got a massive risk with it. And that's why I just want to touch, Chair, I want to touch on the waste strategy with the massive overspend it's got already, the massive risk there that we have with incorporating the trade waste, which was one I feel we went away from trade waste some years ago. We drove the charges up, and many of our businesses walked away from us. They went to the outside contractors, and I won't name them. We all knew who they are, and we lost that. And I think there was a good reason behind that as well, is because the recycling, it was classed as residual waste. Now there's new laws coming in, which I do agree with, that trade waste will have to be recycled. But that does not stop people actually going out into the open market, and where their refuse goes is a different thing. That's not our problem. I'm really concerned, and I did say some years ago now, is we're not a business. Why are we entering into thinking we can make money from doing things? I find that really like, I'm a public servant to deliver public services. That's what I am. And to balance the books is we thought we'd enter into, well, we'll try and make a few pound here, Chair, and a few pound there, and try and offset this and offset that. It's proven it does not work. It's really, really difficult. People have been in business for decades, and they have bad years and they have good years. And we all know that. But as a public servant and public servants that we are, in a public distribution of them services, why we believe that we can do it better than anybody else, I'm sorry, I will not agree with that. That's totally false. And it's proven now with the waste. We have one good year, perhaps. I don't think we ever have. And we're losing, it's costing us packets. But it's not costing us, it's costing our residents also, Chairman. And they've got to pick the tab up here. So when you look at the bigger picture of all this, a 7% increase, 7.85 maybe, not too sure yet at the moment. But everything we've talked about is 10%, 10%, 10% today. And everything we've talked about in the last meetings is 10%, 10%. That's extras and extras and extras. These families, middle class, lower class, families are going to have to find from somewhere. Because we can't deliver services, dom care, you name it, everything is 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. But there's massive risk with that, because if we do not achieve what we want to achieve, it ain't going to happen. So I'll give you the home to school transport, Chair. I have two companies in my ward which do and have for decades work with this council, Monmouthshire County Council, in delivering home to school transport, and them two companies, they tell me, how can a council deliver when we can't deliver? And I know officers will say whatever, but these companies can't go to the bank and borrow money to put electric vehicles on the road or buy brand new vehicles, because they've got to go and borrow that money. We as a council, we can do what we want. We'll just go and borrow it. It's the ratepayers or some other institution will pay the interests on them. So I find that actually stepping into this, buying 8 more vehicles to transport kids around, that's eight more children sitting on seats. I know that a lot of these children who travel to out of areas in taxis or whatever, they do not want to be in a minibus, because most of these children will be SEN children. There's no doubt about that, going to specialist schools which are around the county or in other counties. They don't like travelling with other children. They find it difficult. I know that for a fact, because I've had parents and families talking to me about this. So I know it may be saving money, but I think we have to actually look at this and think, why can we not find specialist transport and have a better price for it? The people tell me around me, the businesses around me, is the council has driven them out of business. It's not kept them in business, it's driven them out of business because they've demanded lower rates, which they can't deliver. And that's why actually they're not tendering for contracts. I think to say we're not tendering for contracts. So I think we need to really look at that, and I'd like a better explanation for the budget of the savings in borrowing money, to buy that transport for the 8 buses.
Should we go to Deb?
Yeah, so that's my 2 questions, Chairman. Thank you. The risk associated with the waste and the strategy we have in transporting children around the county to outer counties as well, with the rates that we're putting out there for contractors to bid on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Howarth.
Do you mind if I just come in there briefly, Chair?
Of course.
Thank you for the questions, Councillor Howarth. You mentioned about the authority is not a business and we shouldn't enter into the marketplace. I mean, we derive around £25 million worth of income from the fees and charges that we charge for the services that we provide. That's income that goes to support our public services. You know, and I'll bring in Carl, if that's okay, Carl, and also Deb to talk about the school transport. But I believe your point earlier about you know, children with additional needs in terms of how they transport was already answered by Deborah earlier with regards to, you know, we're not proposing they have a specific home to school transport provision. It's designed to accommodate their needs. And, you know, I think your comments there were, you know, a little bit wide of the mark in terms of what we're proposing here. You also, you know, you spoke, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I tell you what, while I find it again, I'll bring in Carl, if that's okay, to speak briefly around the risk and the volatility of the waste market. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Councillor Howarth, for the questions. With regard to the trade waste, we have a statutory duty to provide that service when asked. So we don't have a choice about providing that service. If a business comes to us and asks us to provide it, we must. We can arrange for someone else to collect it on our behalf, but the duty is there for us to provide a service. So we try and ensure that the trade waste service washes its face, and that is going to become more difficult with the recycling now, as we don't know what impact that is going to be. We may see a big move of our customer base over to private commercial waste collectors. That's a risk that we take when we're dealing with this. In some ways, it's not a disbenefit, because if we lose those customers, we also lose the waste that they bring in, which increases our recycling. The whole idea from Welsh Government to increase business recycling is so that businesses are doing the same levels as households. So it's a balance for us going forward, but we've got to provide that service. We're just trying to make sure it washes its face. In the domestic waste side, it's not a choice. We're not trying to be a business here. Domestic waste will always cost us money. We have to collect it. That's our statutory duty. That is one of the reasons for us being a council, is to collect domestic waste. So we have to collect it. The recycling element of that has massively reduced what our costs would be. So recycling is about half the cost of sending material to landfill or to energy from waste. So if we weren't recycling, we'd be paying double the cost on sending it for other types of treatment. Across the years, we probably, you know, if we were going back 10, 15 years ago without recycling, our budget would probably now be 2 or 3 times the size it is to manage the treatment of that waste. But there's a cost. It's a service we have to provide, and there is a cost to that service, and the costs keep going up. So yeah, I hope that's answered the question.
Thank you, Carl. Deborah, do you want to come in here?
Thank you. In terms of the points you've raised, I'm going to have a very similar response to Carl, in that we have a statutory responsibility to provide home to school transport. We started our service as the operator of last resort because we weren't getting the tenders or the bids in from the external market. For whatever reason that might be, they weren't coming in. We are now operating far more contracts than we originally anticipated, because when we can't get a bid, we have to provide that. We have no choice. In terms of the vehicles, we don't we're in the same position as everyone else. When we have to transition, we've got WG requirements that say we have to transition our vehicles by 2030. So we'll work on that process now. We borrow in the same way as everyone else does when we acquire a vehicle. So we are no different from an external provider. We don't make any money off home to school transport. The whole cost of home to school transport is a liability for the authority and is circa £6 million. So there is a duty on us to ensure that we are, wherever possible, reducing those costs. When we go out to tender, we do not specify a price. The bidder specifies the price, and we implement an annual uplift for all of our external contractors based on industry standard percentage uplifts of the cost of providing those services. So I don't accept that we are requiring them to reduce their costs so that it's unviable. We're working with our operators in the best way that we can to ensure that they remain viable because we need them. But at the same time, where we are seeing operators exploiting some of the gaps in the marketplace, and we have had tenders at a cost of £500 a day. We're in that ballpark. There is a duty on us to reduce those costs. And just so that you're aware, we are also working with the CCR on some of the vehicles that were used on the electric taxi trial. They are owned by the 10 regions in the authority, so we are looking to see if we can reutilise some of those vehicles so there will be no additional cost because we've already paid for them.
Just step in on the latter point of Deborah Hillhour's point there about the running costs, etc. My point I'm making is Simon Howarth, to go and buy a bus, would have to probably go to the bank and borrow £250,000 or something, or buy buses, whereas the council would use public funds to do that. So the risk to me would be I'd probably have to put collateral up to the council. It doesn't actually different, isn't it? And I think that's the point I'm trying to make is operators out there find it really difficult to operate within that time frame and that scale of doing things. And overbidding, as you know, is business as well. Perhaps they don't want the contract. Perhaps the contract is no value to them. That's probably why they overbid it. If they get it, happy days. If they don't get it, you know, I mean, that's not rocket science either. I mean, the point I'm making is operators are few and far between there because they've gone out of business, because they've been driven out of business. And I think that goes down to a lot of who've said today there's massive risk with a lot of this. Our town centres, massive risk. I think Councillor Lucas made the point there is we are stepping into something here now which has got a massive risk with it. This is the first one I've seen that much risk with it budget in 22 years, and there's massive risk here because if it doesn't happen and things and people turn on us, we've got a massive problem as well, because quarterly monitoring will come out that actually it's getting deeper and deeper. Thank you, Chair. That was my point I was making. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howarth. So lastly, because I do want to take a quick break and let's move on to the second item. Councillor Tudor-Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to make a comment, really, in terms of home to school transport. Parents expect, and when I was a parent of kids in school, I had two were transported, and certainly parents speaking to me, you've got ALN children, and SEN, the term that was used earlier on, is really quite pejorative now. It's gone out of use. It is ALN. They want their children transported to school, and if contractors do not put in a tender for a particular route, then parents expect the authority to step in and provide transport for those children. And it as has been said, it is a statutory obligation. And at the end of the day, I've been in council this is my second session. I've been through a reasonable number of budgets. Yes, it is tough, but how can we save nearly 22 million without making some reduction? So I think overall, speaking to my residents, they prefer leisure centres to shut a little bit early, but have their children educated and their elderly parents looked after. So thanks, dear.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I understand Peter Davis wants to come back in to say one final thing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just going to make a couple of wrap-up comments, if it's okay. Yeah, I think it's just, and it's not to talk back to obviously the debate that's worked its way through. That's for you, Chair, clearly. I think probably just to sort of highlight where we are in the process. Obviously, really good scrutiny session today in terms of the quality of questions that you've obviously yourself touched on. As has been the case through scrutiny, this is the last of the three meetings, but we're probably just broken the back of halfway of the budget consultation events, and clearly all of that feedback is hugely important to Councillor Carar and the Cabinet and ourselves as officers, so that we can obviously deliberate over that. And it's to highlight that, but also the very fact that when the draft budget proposals came through Cabinet, even though tabled at Cabinet on, I think, the 17th of January, you know, the bulk and the lion's share of that work would have been done pre-Christmas. And I guess to 2 points. One, to pick up Councillor Howe's point on risk, but also on the very fact that, and I think I'm a bit of a broken record on this one, a budget, okay, is a dynamic process. If there's one thing for certain, the figures will change every single day, and you have to make judgment calls and assessments on the basis of levels of risk and what you look to hard bake into your budget or not, and that those conscious decisions have to be taken. There will be things that Cabinet is going to have to deliberate on because of change of circumstances and events since the draft budget proposals were put through. I know Councillor Carar referred to, for example, a consequential and that potentially landing. The £25 million, I think that Councillor Brin, Councillor Carar referred to. That's a positive, yes, but there will be other things coming into the mix that will be going the other way. So this remains, you know, to the point of £22 million worth of pressures having to be managed through the budget for a second year now running. A very challenging budget. Equally, there will be some very challenging discussions and decisions needing to be made based on the feedback from consultation and the change of circumstances and events that will need on those judgment calls to see further adjustments to the proposals. So it's just simply to highlight, you know, what we'll now need to work through in the next couple of weeks before we obviously work with Cabinet and Councillor Carar and Cabinet look to bring forward a set of final budget proposals through Cabinet on the 28th of February. And then Council on the 29th. So that was my sort of wrap-up input. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm right in saying that I think everyone in the meeting recognises the budget pressures that you're trying to manage. There are a number of questions, however, around the trade waste increases, and do we know the impact that this will have on our businesses across Monmouthshire? We wanted some reassurance on the home to school transport proposals and wanting to ensure it doesn't have a detrimental impact on additional learning needs. We needed more understanding with regards to homelessness and the savings you're going to make, and utilising Seven View Care Home and whether or not it's a suitable facility. Obviously, there's some concern with the settlement of 2.3 when the average is 3.1. We're hoping that the Cabinet member will continue pushing Welsh Government for extra funding. There were some questions around second home council tax premiums, which I think were answered during the meeting. There was some concern that there's no mention or lack of information on highways. And we understand that obviously things that need to be cut are around Mon Life and leisure centres. However, the early closure on a Sunday, for instance, as Councillor Lucas shared with us, will need to disband, and then we need to consider the long-term impact on health and well-being for our residents across the county. The tourism closures, this will cause a lot of confusion with residents and visitors and will have impact on the wider tourism economy. Car parking charges, the direct effect on footfall in our towns. Yeah, I think I've covered everything. Councillor Carar, do you want to come in? there and say a few words, or are you happy with what I've said to sum up what was asked?
I think you've covered it just fine there, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a quick break because we need to change over the officers. Can I thank Councillor Carar, Peter and Jonathan and all the other officers who have helped with answering members' questions, and can I thank all members for your contributions. A very challenging few months ahead for the local authority. We know it's not going to be easy, and it's going to, be very concerning for residents and businesses and individuals over the coming months and years ahead. And also our departments. They've got some challenging times ahead, but our residents and businesses must be at the forefront of the council's consideration as it plans its 23-24 budget. So we'll take a quick break and then we'll move on to the next item agenda. Thank you. Hi, Robert. Are people now back in chambers? Are members back in?
Just waiting on a couple, Chair. I'll go and chase them up.
Lovely, thank you. Welcome, Hugh. Welcome, Dave. How are you both?
Very good, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
I'll allow you both to introduce yourselves after we get started.
I think everyone's back now, Chair.
Lovely. Okay, so we're now going into our next item, which is to scrutinise the Public Spaces Protection Order for dog controls. And we have Hugh Owen and Dave Jones. Would you just like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, David Jones, Head of Public Protection.
Thank you, Chair. Hugh Owen, Principal Environmental Health Officer.
Lovely, thank you. And I think we've got Cabinet Member Councillor Paul Griffiths to introduce the report.
Very quickly indeed, Chair, before I hand over to the officers who've written the report, this Scrutiny Committee has on several occasions considered the evolution of our draft public protection orders, public spaces protection orders, and has supported the step that we took to go to public consultation. The detail of that public consultation is before you, and the officers will take us through that. Broadly, what we can see is that the public are supportive of the direction of travel. Specific points have been made with reference to specific locations, which you'll want to take note of. I'm pleased that our town and community councils have been involved in the discussion around those specific locations, but I certainly will be interested in the views of committee members as we prepare to take this report to Cabinet. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Over to you, Hugh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Members, very brief update, first of all, as to how we've arrived at this position with a report before us. Currently, the Council has a designation order under the Dogs Fouling of Land Act 1996, which makes it an offence for a person in control of a dog not to pick up after it if it fouls certain designated public spaces. We have a collaborative working group with town and community councils called Give Dog Fouling the Red Card, which I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have heard of, which has been great at helping raise awareness of the antisocial nature of not picking up after dog mess. But also has been a great opportunity for members over the years to raise concerns about other related dog control issues, which have cross-directorate bearing, as it covers expectations for safe and appropriate use of playing fields, playgrounds, school lands, cemeteries, etc. So we started looking at this with our first report to Strong Community Select back in March 2020, so quite a few years ago, as Councillor Griffiths introduced, which endorsed our first public consultation carried out between July and October 2021, for which we had over 1,300 responses. Since then, guided by consultation responses, further engagement with key stakeholders and 3 further reports to scrutiny, we developed the proposed PSPO to introduce 5 key provisions for our public space dog controls. So endorsed by committee back in May last year, we went out to public consultation on the draft PSPO. The public consultation was in October and November of last year. As the report provides, the consultation was wide-ranging, with direct messaging to stakeholders, to key stakeholders. We had a really good response, I'm pleased to advise, with over 500 completed questionnaires, 62% of which were completed by dog owners. A summary of the responses to the 5 key provisions of dog controls in the intended PSPO is provided in the report, and more detail in particular in Appendix 1. I'm pleased to advise that each of the provisions received substantial majority support. The proposed exclusion in Leeds-only areas, as expected, attracted a lot of comment and resulted in some amendments to the proposed PSPO, which went out to public consultation, to the one which is before you now. And these amendments are outlined in 3.14. The amended PSPO is presented in full in Appendix 3. One change in particular to bring to members' attention since the circulation of a report and the draft PSPO relates to Gilwern Sports Pitch. In the public consultation, the sports pitch was marked as an exclusion area, in keeping with the PSPO theme of giving further protection to areas of highest public health risk because of its use. A petition signed by approximately 130 households was received in response, given reasons, in response to the public consultation, given reasons for it to be a dogs on Leeds area. So I brought this to the attention of Llanelli Community Council, who own the land, and early January they requested that the designation for the sports pitch was changed to Leeds only. This is reflected in 3.14 of the report and map 111 of Appendix 3. Now, I need to draw to members' attention that since the recent circulation of the report, Llanelli Community Council have reconsidered this, or considered this further, and requested that it is actually revert back to an exclusion area, which is what we put out in the original public consultation. And have given very original reasons for doing so, protecting public health on the marked sports pitch. So map 111 in the PSPO moving forward will show as an exclusion area. It's worth highlighting this not only as a correction to the report, but also illustrates the need to consider each restricted access area, and there's 200 of them in the PSPO, on a case-by-case basis, and not just a blanket approach. This point is made very clearly by the dog interest groups, whose responses were very useful and are provided in Appendix 2. Hopefully, we've been able to deliver this careful consideration on a case-by-case basis, and my thanks in particular to my colleague Sue Parkinson in the Waste and Street Services section, and the Town and Community Council members who were an integral part of where we've arrived at with the report. So the PSPO in Appendix 3, with a change to proposed change to map 111, is what we would like to move to individual cabinet member or cabinet decision. I'm sure there may be lots of questions, and happy to do my best to answer them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Hugh. So members, the raise hand facility is up in the chat bar. For those of you who have any questions for Hugh, you can raise your hand whilst I wait for some members to put their hand up. I noted that there was a low number of responses from sports clubs. Do we know why?
Thank you, Chair. No, that is interesting. I should say that over the last couple of years, we've had fairly good response from sports clubs to arrive where we're at with the draft PSPO. So I think the sports clubs who wanted to make their comments and wanted really the areas to be exclusion had already done so, and that had fed into where we were now.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Thank you. So we've got a lot of hands up. Councillor Brin.
Yeah, diolch. I think the number of responses, the low number of responses is disappointing, but I think the fact that the majority of the people that are in favour of them is optimistic, because people often only respond to consultations when they're unhappy with what's going on. I also note that there aren't many suggestions for additional exclusion dog lead zones, which makes me think that the objectives are targeted about right. And I was happy to read that the Dogs Trust enthusiastically support dogs on leads orders, and that dogs should be excluded in some areas. But I do share the respondents' concerns about the practicalities of enforcement, particularly where designated play areas are not fenced in, and so enforcement is a little trickier. And I wondered if we can affect effectively assess the effectiveness of this directive in 6 months or 2 years' time, and ask for feedback from the public, so we can ask residents how we think that they think it's getting on following implementation, if that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brin.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Brin. Yeah, great points regarding enforcement. So I think I didn't touch on it in my introduction because I knew it would be raised, obviously, because it's an integral part. I think we've got to look at, well, what's the purpose of a PSPO first and foremost, because that dictates how we enforce and how we use it. The process of arriving to where we're at now and then hopefully delivering a PSPO is so important because it just raises awareness, first and foremost. That's effective enforcement, first of all, is raising awareness. A lot, there is a school of thought to think, well, effective enforcement is how many cases we take to court in whatever public health area of work that we deal with, but it's not. Effective enforcement is to avoid cases going to court and avoid having to take enforcement action. So just the process of going through the PSPO, the public consultations, and the next stage, provided we get a cabinet approval, the very first stage would be with the PSPO would be the signage would be telling our communities that the PSPO is in place. And that, so the initial months, and this is the experience of colleagues throughout Wales and the other local authorities, the initial months is going to be raising awareness, be it signposting, so every restricted access area will need signs to explain exactly what they can and what they can't do in those areas. So the large areas, for example, Bailey Park, there may be some Leeds only areas, or there may be some marked sports pitches. So that'll be clear. So that's the raising awareness side of things, which would be stage one. Stage two then, well, there has to be, of course, some teeth to any order. And what will that look like? It really is even though this has been presented by Environmental Health, it really is a cross-directorate approach, because the exclusion areas that we're looking at, for example, cover your schools, they cover the community and places, playgrounds, they cover the marked sports pitches. And so that we would be looking for a number of officers across the directorates to have a designated authority. There was indeed a cabinet report in 2016 where the foundations of that has been set out under the Antisocial Behaviour Act. So, for example, there are a number of environmental health staff who at the moment are authorised to issue fixed penalty notices for dog fouling in certain designated places. That's certainly going to remain the case for when the PSPO is in place. We would hope, and we've started discussion with the communities in place team, so the waste and street cleansing team will be considering, well, what capacity have they got? We've also got, of course, our civil enforcement officers. Now, what I do need to be realistic with members is that we don't have officers waiting just to take on these duties. As we know, the waste teams, the civil enforcement officers, and indeed my officers, we're extremely busy, 101 duties already, so there will have to be aspects of that looked at. But enforcement is really going to be about intelligent enforcement. What we do know is that for things like dog fouling, it's not a matter of getting lots of people out patrolling, because that's not effective. You could have an officer out patrolling 12 hours a day. Will they actually catch an offence? Well, they may or they may not do. That's not the intention. So it can be intelligence-led. So wherever through our town and community council working groups give dog fouling a red card, will be reported where the hotspot areas. Who are there individuals who continually flout the rules and regulations in place? And then, of course, we'll have officers across the directorates hopefully, who will be authorised then to be able to act on that. Just one point which I think is going to be important is with regards to the carrying a dog poo bag. You know, that's been raised. Well, potentially that's contentious, and is it to be the intention for enforcement officers just to march up to any dog owner and say, well, have you got a dog bag? If not, here's a fixed penalty notice. It's going to be intel-led, and where it's going to be really useful, if we get a complaint, for example, Mr. Smith regularly walks his dog in Bailey Park, he never picks up, it's always 7 in the morning, so we can work on that intel. If we see Mr. Smith, instead of waiting and following him and seeing, well, is he picking up or not, it'll be appropriate at that time for an enforcement officer to go up and say, well, look, this is a PSPO, have you got a bag? So it's going to be about intelligent enforcement and authorising a number of officers across the directorates. Hope that helps.
Could I just add, Chair, could I just add, because I'm sure members will have questions about enforcement. Some will be aware there's a litter review that will be conducted this year, so that's led by Carl with some members. So litter review will be looking at the capacity. As Hugh says, we've got busy officers, but we look to environmental health staff, the waste wardens that are within Carl Tewig's team, and also the civic enforcement officers that are part of Graham Kinsella's team. So that is ongoing work. So just so members are aware, there is a litter review going on, plus the parking review. So as part of those 2 reviews, I'm sure this will come up as a feature of that review, as to, it is a bit of a last resort. We shouldn't count success on the number of FPNs. As Hugh says, it's education awareness first and responsible dog ownership. But as and when we do need to go down that route, that will form a feature of those 2 reviews that are coming in the coming months. Thank you.
Okay, next we got Councillor Tudor-Thomas.
Okay, thanks, and thanks, for that report, and that, I've been a part of it in some ways. Been on Abergavenny Town Council in the past, but to cut to the chase, what I would say is, certainly in my ward, and you've mentioned Bailey Park, which is right in Park Ward. This PSPO is going to be controversial, and obviously, yes, there's a number of people here have responded and said we don't want dogs in sports areas picking up, carrying the bags, etc. Is they're all for it, but certainly when I've been out on my ward and without the councillors on the town council, when we did a sort of a day about highlighting dog mess in the park. And the mention of the PSPO, some people were almost to the point of being abusive. Dog owners who said, well, certainly I want to take my child, I want to take my dog with me, I want to run them on the sports pitch, I want to run them in Bailey Park, and no one is going to stop me. And I think we have got quite a high bar here to cross in terms of raising awareness, in terms of people actually listening to that. In Bailey Park, there are signs up saying, dogs on leads. I could go in there this morning and practically every dog that I see is not on a lead. And obviously there is no visible enforcement. And I think enforcement would be my key sort of question. And being involved with Gwent Police when we had anti-social driving in the Fairfield, and we put a PSPO in there, but then on most nights a patrol car would pop in and would penalise people, who were racing around and doing donuts, etc., with their cars. So I think enforcement is a key factor. And the other thing I think we've got to think about, which he was highlighted, is awareness for a start, raising awareness amongst the population, but it will come down to enforcement. I think I'm right in saying RCT have enforcement officers. They're obviously highly unpopular members of the council personnel, because when somebody's actually penalised, they are not very happy with that. So I think we've got quite a difficult issue. And the final thing I would say is, could we think, for example, in Bailey Park, where the swimming pool was, of having a designated free-running dog area? In my mind, I'm a dog owner. I would never run my dogs on a play pitch, because I've had kids in the past and you see people playing. The rugby club are tearing their hair out sometimes because there's so much dog feces on the pitches. They have to clean it up for 10 minutes before they can actually play. So, you know, I'm in favour of it, but I think the key question is enforcement and awareness. But at the end of the day, enforcement has got to be a key part of this driver if we want to improve things. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Griffiths, did you want to come in there? Did I see you? No, okay. Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, you know, from the point of view of the children and you know, public protection. I mean, obviously, dog feces, if they get those in their eyes, it can cause a health issue, and I think obviously that's important, and that's probably the reason for play areas and schools, playing fields, and so forth. I just wanted to ask a question about the Kennel Club, because they raised the issue about on page 44 of exclusion on school land, because they mentioned about you know, an exception when the head teacher of the school wanted a dog to go in on pet therapy or the Barker and Reed Foundation, and I just wondered about presumably it would only be in relation to the fields in the school, and they could walk along the sort of tarmac areas going in, and I think it would be useful to clarify that particular point and whether there needs to be some sort of exception there. The other question I've got is looking at the Annex 1. A lot of them are exclusion orders as opposed to lead-only orders, and one of the things I was thinking about was what is going to be sometimes you introduce measures and then you have indirect consequences of the measures. And I'm just thinking about dog fouling on pavements and whether there's you know, it might lead to the need for more signage there. And I'm not sure if they can get fined for fouling on pavements as well, and whether the enforcement officers would look at that. But also the question of if there are a lot of exclusion zones, are there going to be areas, I think that Councillor Thomas mentioned about where, you know, dogs can run free. I mean, I'm not a dog owner or anything, but I think possibly that there are going to be less areas for dog owners to exercise their dogs. I mean, I personally, sometimes in the woods, I don't like the dogs running free, because sometimes, you know, if there's a vicious dog there, I mean, I know this is NRW land, but you know, I prefer them on leads, because sometimes the owner isn't as close to the dog as you would like, you know, in order to control it. But I mean, I think NRW have a stick and flick policy with regard to their messing on woodland, you know, so I suppose that's a little bit different. But I think, you know, is the balance right on exclusion and lead-only ones, and what are going to be the indirect consequences of this, and will the enforcement officers look at the potential of dog fouling on pavements, because that can also be an issue for you know, both village areas and also urban areas as well. You know, so what's going to happen if these people say, well, there's nowhere my dog can go, and where are they going to look at as an alternative, and what are the consequences of that in terms of dog fouling? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Hugh, do you want to come back in there?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Councillor Brown. Again, some great points, and thank you, Chair. The balance, first of all, that's what struck me, and that's what this report and what we've been trying to do over the last few years is seek that balance. It was very interesting reading some of the responses in the comments boxes that we had, because a number of the questions had comments boxes. I think I looked at one response, this order is complete common sense. I thought it'd be, it makes complete sense. The next comment was, this PSPO proposes ridiculous. So people are going to have complete varied views. So it is incumbent upon the council to try and seek that balance, and that's what we've been trying to do over the last few years, is be proportionate. So I think it's important, a couple of key points here to be clear with. Picking up, the main thrust of the order is to require any dog walker to pick up their dog mess if it fouls a public space in the county. I think that's basic. If you're walking a dog and it fouls a public space, wherever it is in the county, pick up after it and dispose of it properly. That links in with, well, if you haven't got a dog bag or something appropriate, well, you're not really going to be able to do that. So I think those elements are so basic. Compared to what we've got at the moment, and let's be clear, at the moment it only covers certain designated public spaces. It doesn't cover all public spaces. So theme number one of a PSPO is, if the dog fouls a public space, pick up after it. I think that's, throughout our consultations, received widespread support. Then the next question is, well, why is the council restricting access, whether or not it's through leads only or exclusion areas? Why are we doing that? Why are we proposing that? It's not because we want to. We've been led by it, by the town and community councils, by stakeholder responses. And the reason being is that I think it's generally accepted that there are certain locations which are of higher public health risk. And those locations are your marked sports pitches, your children's playgrounds, and your school grounds. And if your dog fouls those areas, with the best will in the world, it's going to leave some sort of residue. And do we really want our children, or the sports users, or whoever's using those, or the school children, still being exposed? Does there remain a public health risk? And the resounding message that we get in is, yes, there is. My son was a really keen sports player, but dad's a rugby player. Dads always used to walk, and mums used to walk up and down the pitch picking up the mess, but there were so many times you just leave a smear of things, and 10 minutes later you'll see somebody being rugby tackled in that spot. So that's why we've got more exclusion areas. There's about 180 exclusion areas with about 20 leads-only areas. That's why we're targeting. We say, well, no, if you take a dog on a lead on a marked sports pitch, then you're still going to foul, and you still got that problem of residue. If you take a dog on a lead in a children's playground or on a school playing field, it's still going to foul. You've still got that fundamental problem. So that's why, we've got our members. It's weighted to exclusion areas, where we're saying, well, no, we've got to protect that risk. The leads-only areas have been introduced where, looking at a primary use of that area, do we really want a dog running around? Is it contrary really to the primary use of that? And the locations where we've got leads-only areas are typically cemeteries, the skate parks, and there's a couple of wildlife areas where we feel when no dogs really in these areas should be on leads. There's no outstanding public health concern from the dog mess in cemeteries, for example, because we haven't got the children playing, etc., etc. So yeah, dogs can go into those zones, but they should be on a lead. So that's where the balance is. Again, as to, okay, we've got 180 odd exclusion areas. Should there be some more in it? Should there be others which are not included? We've tried to be proportionate and seek, advice from town and community councils. Just picking up a couple of points. Fouling of payments, so I think I've answered that. Yeah, if a dog fouls any public space, the owner must pick up. The dog walker must pick up.
And is there a fine for that?
If they don't, yes. So if you don't pick up after your dog, any public space, then it'll be an offence. It'll be a breach of a PSPO. Schools and Kennel Club, again, the Kennel Club have made some really good responses, and it again is down to intelligent enforcement. The maps are clear on the PSPO, and I encourage all members, if you're in your area, click on the maps. It's shaded, but if a head teacher has a dog therapy session or something of that nature, then obviously the county council are not going to enforce that. It really has to be down to the head teacher instructing and doing that as part of a school curriculum. Just one other point, stick and flick, we've pondered at length. We spent many sleepless hours thinking, well, how does this policy marry up, or pick it up wherever it falls in the public space, and marry up with a stick and flick? And it's interesting that the Kennel Trust actually, and I'll quote them, so in other words, do we really need the PSPO to cover rural areas? Do you really need people to pick up in rural areas? And if I may quote the Kennel Club, strongly promotes reasonable dog ownership and believes that dog owners should always pick up after their dogs wherever they are, including fields and woods in the wider countryside, and especially where farm animals graze to reduce the risk of passing Neospora and Sarcoidosis to cattle and sheep, respectively. So, yeah, stick and flick goes so far, but to pick up after the dog mess is fundamental. So, again, we've tried to be proportionate and balanced in the PSPO before us. I think I've picked up most of the points.
Yeah, I think the other ones were about indirect consequences and whether there'd be more pavement fouling, and also, you know, how many areas are left that, how many areas that a dog can sort of, I don't know, run or whatever.
Apologies. Yes, and Councillor Thomas raised a point with Bailey Park. If it had been a case in point, which I mentioned earlier, Gilwern playing fields. So we can see that's quite contentious, what's been proposed, where Connectley Community Council want the Mark Sports Pitch as an exclusion area, and want the rest of the grounds a Leeds-only area. But we do know that there's a strong feeling in the Gilwern area that they want dogs to run off the Leeds, and this really is settled nicely in the community. So what will develop from that as a case in point, and I think these do need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, is that there will be discussions, and Connectley Community Council already raised it, discussions with the council's grounds team, who will look at adjacent council-owned land, which takes in a field and a bit of woodland, to see if that then is appropriate for local residents to take their dogs off a lead. So that thing is going to, that sort of development will be taken on a case-by-case basis as and when we see issues arise. As Councillor Thomas mentioned, the swimming area in Bailey Park, I'm sure once a PSPO in place, approaches to the grounds maintenance teams, wasting communities in place, these sorts of things can be considered. Having said that, ultimately we've got to decide at some time where we're going to pitch our exclusion areas, our reduced access areas, and it has taken 2 or 3 years of consultation in between the two big public consultations we've had with stakeholders to arrive where we're at, which we think is proportionate, and most importantly, that there are themes and reasons for introducing the exclusion areas and Leeds-only areas that we have.
And will there be a monitoring of whether there's extra pavement fouling as a result? Thank you. Well,
as I'm sure most members are aware, there is a Keep Wales tidy review of our streets every year, which we look at for litter and dog fouling, which again is in the communities in place and street cleansing side of things. I can't see any reason, and that's certainly not the feedback that I'm having from other local authorities. And I think 18 of the 22 local authorities in Wales have a PSPO in place, although obviously varying restrictions. I think going through the process of raising awareness and that there will be signs, not on all streets, but will be signs in public areas drawing attention to the need to pick up under the PSPO. I think that can only have a beneficial and be positive in getting people to pick up after their dogs, so certainly compared to what it is now.
Thank you, Hugh. Just on awareness, what are we going to do to inform residents of this? You know, what are the methods we're going to use to educate dog owners and non-dog owners of what the rules are and what the PSPO is and how it impacts green spaces? Because I note that Caldicott Castle Park will be lead only. I see so many dogs down there off their lead, so it's like, how are we going to ensure that people are aware of what's potentially coming?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this is key, isn't it? Again, effective enforcement is about raising awareness, and I don't like catchphrases, but what does spring to mind, which when I started chairing the Give Dog Fouling for a Red Card group 7-8 years ago, is local solutions to local problems. So first and foremost, it is about town and community councils, as they have throughout this. Really, we've gone through this process because of requests from town and community councils, and through the collaborative work. And it is first and foremost for town and community councils to get that message out to their local residents. Secondly, obviously the county council have got responsibilities.
Yeah, utilise it.
And it's about using our website. Then there's, as we touched on in the report, put in some detail, there's £37,000 worth at the moment. We think it's going to be approximate of signage. So there's going to be, we need about 330 signs to our restricted access areas. The signs that are in use, when we look at our neighbours, for example, in Torvine, they are really excellent signs. We're fortunate, but a number of local authorities have done this before us. Rhondda and Taff has been mentioned. The proposed PSPO is actually very similar to the one that Rhondda and Taff have got in. So we can use that sort of signage. Where we've got mixed messages in an area, for example, Bailey Park, sorry, Councillor Thomas raising Bailey Park all the time, where there may be a leads only area and an exclusion area, there will some signs will actually be mapped. So when you enter a site, it'll be mapped. It'll say, well, these were marked sports pitches, exclusion areas, these are leads only areas. So there's a mixed bag of things. And then, of course, we'll have a collaborative working through the Give Dog Fowl and Red Card. And certainly in the initial months, it's going to be about signage. It is going to be about getting some officers out. The grounds maintenance teams, for example, be really good if we can get the PSPO approved April, May time, start doing the signage. The grounds teams will be out, they'll be cutting the grass, mowing the grass, and they can introduce then to dog walkers what we're doing and the implications if they don't comply.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. Next, we got Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this document. It's very interesting, and it must be one of the most controversial topics that we've had to discuss at Scrutiny. Just a couple of very quick questions. You were saying about the signs, and you also mentioned about giving dog fouling the red card. And the last Scrutiny meeting when we were discussing this, I had the impression that you weren't going to be using that red card because there was too much dialogue on it. It was going to be more graphic. The boards were going to be more graphic. So if we got any idea of the kind of thing, I can visualise the kind of thing that needs to be on them. And also, will the order be printed on the signs that this is a designated area, so-and-so, that one? And I've done a little bit of homework, and there are some local authorities that actually have got dog bag vending machines, and they're very, very cheap, something like 50 pence for a roll. But I just thought that was interesting because I've not seen anything around this area, but I have seen them in other local authorities. And contact for in the intelligence part. How do members of the public or ourselves, who and where do we contact? I'm sure we've all seen in the past, we've all got incidents that in our primary school, a parent actually took the dog on a lead last week and let the dog do its business inside in the playground. Now, surely, you know, there should be an immediate reaction. I should be able to pick up my phone and say, well, look, I know the woman, because it was a woman, and, you know, are you going to do something about it? So that was the other one. And also, as Town Council, we're trustees of the King George V playing field. So obviously we've got our own signage, which it's okay, but it's not as good as what it could be. Would the Town Council be able to utilise some of the enforcement officers at some time with liaison between yourselves and Town Council? Thank you.
Okay, you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Stevens. Yeah, again, great points. The messaging has got to be clear, hasn't it? So when we've got a PSPO in place, the very last thing we want is if somebody goes to the bother of reporting the matter, who wants to do that? You know, we don't really, do we? Pick up the phone. And on that point, first of all, complaints will be, we envisage, will be to our local hubs, as we are now, whatever the issues are, whether or not it's potholes or any public health issue. So that will still be the same. And then the hub officers can direct it to the appropriate directorate. The last thing we want is when somebody does report it and we then approach the dog owner, which we wouldn't need to do, is from to say, well, I didn't know that the PSPO was in place. So the messaging has got to be clear. And so first and foremost, there will be a plethora of signs, no doubt, at many of these locations. And if they're contradictory, then maybe the give dog owner a red card sign. They will need to be taken down and they need to be removed if they're contradictory to the PSPO. And so hopefully there'll be a better street scene look in many of our parks with reduced signage, because so many of them have had different signs. I think if you go into some parks, you'll see different fines, whatever they may say at the moment. So it's going to be a consistency. Yes, the PSPO signs will printed. They will say what the 5 key provisions are. Has to do that, certainly in the restricted access areas. The vending machine point is a pertinent one. We work closely again with the town and community councils. At the moment, town and community councils are responsible for the bins in locations and pay the emptying costs of that, and many do provide dog bags free on the bins. So that, I think, would fall probably to town and community councils to look at. A number of years ago, the county council used to provide bags which could be collected at the hubs. For times of austerity, etc., that discretionary service was removed, and there's no budget to bring that back in. So I think that will be certainly a good point, something for town and community councils, which I'm sure they will look at to assist. I think that's the majority of the points.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Dave, did you want to come in there?
I just think the last one was about the school incidents, wasn't it? And I think it is about, we can't do everything. So I think the landowner, whoever that would be, Mon Life, Monmouthshire Housing Association, have a role to play. So first and foremost, I think it'd be for the head teacher in that situation to speak to said parent to say that is unacceptable. We can't expect a few people to be responsible for it all. So it is very much about the landowner, whoever that might be. So it's very much a shared responsibility, which hopefully is reflected in the report as well. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Griffiths, did you want to come back in there?
Just briefly, throughout this whole process, as the Cabinet member, I ask myself, are we taking a balanced, a reasonable and evidence-based approach? And whenever I listen to Hugh, I feel confident that we are. And I hope the Scrutiny Committee can share that confidence as well. There's been several references to Rhondda and Taf. For several decades, I was a resident and an elected member there. The order was introduced over 10 years ago. It has resulted in significant changes in public expectations and public behaviour. My own rugby club, as a member, had in its history a case of an amputation caused by faeces infecting a wound. The order allowed the public of that area to regulate themselves, and that's what they did. And I think we can be confident it'll be that sort of self-regulation which will take us forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I think it's important to remind people that you can submit a form with regards to littering and dog fouling on council services. It's quite a simple form to fill out as well if you know of any rogue dog owners who are not picking up their dog poop. And lastly, we've got Councillor Howarth.
Chair, you missed Jackie, Councillor Strong.
Okay, sorry, Jackie. Councillor Strong, then Councillor Howarth. I do apologise, Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know what I was going to say now. I've got just a couple of points to make. I just wanted to pick up on something, Lisa, that you said just now. The castle grounds, there are some exclusion areas, you know, where the play park is, where the football pitches, Leadonia area by the lake and the pond and all of that. But most of the area is actually sort of dog, you know, sort of you can walk your dog on the other place. I just wanted to clarify that because obviously that's important and it's sort of close to home as well. I want to raise a couple of things really, and I know it came up at Scrutiny the last time we were talking about this, and because the cricket club and the school grounds are so close to where I live, and I've got vested interest because I've got a little dog. We do walk that area from our house in Deepweir to you know the village and back. There is a path that goes in front of the cricket club that actually is a dog exclusion in the dog exclusion area. Now we raised this before about how the whole active travel routes, you know, sort of relate to the dog exclusion areas, and I think we should be promoting people walking with their dogs or with their kids to and from school. And actually, this is a bit of an anomaly, I think, and also it's going to be really difficult because we're not going to be able to take the dog to watch the cricket anymore. Because that whole area, even if you're on the sort of touch, I don't suppose it's a touch line with cricket, I don't know, but on the outfield, you know, by the actual fence, we won't be able to take the dog in. So that is an issue for me, and it was just mainly those things that I think it's a really good idea, and I really welcome most of it. You know, if I'm out and about, and a couple of times, you know, somebody's run out of poo bags, and they actually another dog owner, can I, you know, have one, not borrow one, but have one, and you do that willingly, but it just means that you're mindful when you go out walking the dog that you've got something there. I think it's really to be welcomed. I just think it needs a bit of tweaking. I'm really pleased that you've actually redrawn the map where the new housing is going to be opposite Aldi, because that was in the exclusion zone as well. I just want to, you know, maybe a bit of tweaking so that we've actually got that footpath in there, because people do walk from, you know, the other side of the bypass, across there and then down to the village. Thank you.
You're muted, Chair, if you were saying something.
Sorry. Hugh, did you want to come back in?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Councillor Strong, yeah, it's important to point out that the exclusion zones are not restricting access if it's a public right-of-way. So if you've got a public right-of-way crossing an exclusion zone, a footpath, you can still use that footpath. Chippenham Mead in Monmouth is a classic example. We've got lots of sports pitches, marked sport pitches, which are going to be exclusion areas, but lots of public footpaths as well. So that you can walk on the public footpaths through an exclusion area.
With a dog on a lead?
Yes. Well, yes, with your dog. So your dog doesn't necessarily have to be on a lead on that footpath, going through an exclusion area, but of course, if you don't want your dog straying onto the exclusion area, you should be on the lead. So I think that's a really important point. It's certainly not, if we're talking about registered rights away, public footpath, crossing an exclusion area, and the maps are actually quite clear on that. When you zoom into the map, it shows then that that public right of way is free.
Chair, can I just come back?
Of course.
It might not be a public right of way, but it might be, you know, sort of the way that people have always walked, but it's actually a pavement. It's actually got a path. So if it's pavemented and sort of tarmac, you would think that people would be able to walk on it with their dog.
I think obviously you can have some really, on a case-by-case basis, some points. We're going through the consultation. That's what we've been trying to do is get those points out and address them, as we have with, because we've amended the PSPO, which went out to consultation. Certainly, Councillor Song, if you've got particular points and by any locations, make them to us before, hopefully we get the endorsement, go through to Cabinet, and we can look at that further.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Thank you, Hugh. Hugh, will we be doing like an FAQs for when we roll this out that will be available on the website? Because obviously there's going to be lots of questions, and I'm thinking the council email address that inbox is going to be flooded with inquiries and wanting some reassurance around particular areas. Could we do like an FAQ sheet to help people understand a little bit more in that detail?
Yes, yes. Sorry, I was just nodding my head, but I wasn't answering.
That's okay, that's fine.
Yes, certainly we had an FAQ when we went out for the draft consultation, and certainly the FAQ, bilingual FAQ for when we do actually go live with a PSPO, certainly.
Lovely, thank you. And Councillor Howarth.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, members and officers. Really important document. I see we've been mentioned a couple of times there within the conversation this morning. Number one for me is I totally endorse everything we're doing here, but, and there is a big but here, Chair, that we have to work with dog owners as well in making sure we deliver this, and I think it's a two-way process. I'll give you a couple of examples, members. My community spends 14% of its budget on dog bins. They're spending around about £14,000. That'll probably raise to £15,000 this financial year for them. That's a lot of money. That's people's money that we're spending on dog bins. And that will boil down now to my comments for Carl in the budget with the waste bags. A lot of them are using waste bags, food waste bags for the dog mess, which is nearer there for me, and that for me is the complication I have sometimes when we do cuts, which people have brought upon them, and it will possibly cause us a complication in my community for some time. The other complication we've had, members, is that we've had dog users from other areas coming into my community from other council areas, because we haven't had any enforcement or we haven't got this document in place, that's why it's really important that we do this. They come and they use our areas and exercise the dogs, get in the cars then and drive back out and go back home and whatever, because they can't exercise their dogs in their areas because enforcement. So hopefully we will see that. I think the important thing for me, and you did mention it there, as councillors, we have a corporate responsibility as well, and I think we all should work with our town and community councils in with dog owners, and I hope this is hopefully incorporated in the report, that we can do a lot more with dog users in finding areas for them to use, i.e. Bailey Park was mentioned. I brought to the table now in Gilwyn for dog users. Perhaps this should form like an organisation or something, some kind of user group, so they can have their own society and have their own area designated for dog walking and dog exercising. And I think that'd be really important. Dogs are families, or pets are families as well. They're like children to some of our constituents. They've never had children, perhaps some of them, and their dog are the family. So I do get both sides of this as well. I think the picking up is so important. I do see a lot of it, Chair, that it doesn't get picked up. But I've got to say, we have been winning the battle. I think 9 times out of 10, we in my community, we've spent a lot of money and we have won that battle on that. Not perfect, but we're 90% there, I'd say, on doing that. A lot of people are frightened of animals as well, and I think the Dangerous Dog Act is important. And I think the reason behind my community in the backwards and throwing of their issues with the playing fields was, it wasn't so much about the dog feces and things like that, which are important. It was all to do with dogs running loose and kids in a play area, which is very close by. We've had a couple of issues where big dogs have been really frightening for children, etc., jumping up. Nothing nasty at the moment, but that could also happen as well. And I think that was one reason why in our community we've had this to-ing and throwing with the play area, because it's very close to play equipment which is not fenced. And I think the concerns are still there, rightly or wrongly, which for me, I think dogs should be controlled. And I think that's why we had the issue in Gilwyn. And I think that will arise as well in other communities in Monmouthshire about dogs roaming around areas which they do feel should be on leads. So I will look at this when it goes to Cabinet, making sure that we have endorsed a lot of things that we say we're going to do. I think one of the councillors mentioned the enforcement of this. I think we can have whatever we want. I don't want this to sit in a cupboard or on top of a cupboard. I think each department work together in trying to bring some enforcement into this, because I think once the message gets around that we are actually doing something about this, we then will probably gain a lot of respect off dog owners and off constituents also. And I think that's the key for me, is making sure that we actually do something with this, not just rely on a document. I think the enforcement is so important, Chair. So I'll leave it there, and I do thank the officers for putting this together. It's so important for lots of people out there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Howard. Councillor Brin, do you want to just quickly come in?
Yes, it was just something that Councillor Thomas raised, and I think particularly about Chipping and Mead, where the majority of the area seems to be football pitches, even though it's a community space. Will you be marking on signage the areas that dog walkers can actually take their dogs off lead to play a bit of fetch? Because it does seem that the space isn't shared equitably anymore between all the parties. So it would be nice that people can know that there is some place that they can go and take their dogs to run.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. The signs will say where they can't take the dogs. No, I think that's reasonable, because if you live in Monmouth, for example, you know Monmouth, and you know then that you can't take your dog on the marked sports pitches in Chipping and Mead. But you will also know of the depending on whether or not you've got large dog, small dog, what the exercise needs on that dogs are, where you can take it. So and that's what other local authorities have generally done. I think, and perhaps if I may, Chair, just pick up on one or 2 points of Councillor from Simon Howarth, and also links in with your point, Emma. It really is about messaging and getting that messaging right. I think, you know, I've worked in Monmouthshire for 30 odd years. It's a tourist county. We want tourists to come in. We want them to enjoy the county. We want them to come in with their dogs. What we don't want is a tourist to go way back from Abergavenny Food Festival, for example, with a fixed penalty notice. So it is about, because they weren't aware of some aspect of a PSPO. So it really is, and that will be incumbent on us, is to get that messaging out so people do know in the first instance what they can and what they can't do when they're in Monmouthshire, whether or not they're a resident, business or tourist. But then there is a matter of having the ability to enforce where we need to, which, you know, has to be inter-led. There has to be some local commitment to it as well, as it has historically. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Hugh. So I think that's all the questions. Yes, it's a controversial paper, but I think it's welcomed by the committee today. Obviously, we want spaces that are safe for both people and for dogs. And I think it's a common sense approach that the administration's taken on this, and they've listened to residents' feedback in the consultation. Obviously, we asked them reassurance on how we're going to enforce this PSPO, and the difficulties around enforcing on open play areas. The awareness and education is going to be vitally important on whether or not this works. And I think it's important. And I think town and community councils will play a vital role, as well as ourselves as county councillors, and how we're going to manage it going forward. Obviously, we need to consider exceptional circumstances. I think it was Councillor Brown who raised the point on therapy dogs in schools. And also the consequences of the PSPO and the impact on pavements, and ensuring that we can still keep our pavements clean and dog feces free. And obviously there were some questions around how do members of the public submit intelligence. So I'd like to thank you and Dave and obviously Councillor Griffiths for bringing this report. There's been many questions, and I think we're fully supportive of this. Obviously there will be some areas that might have a sticking point, but I think long as we educate the residents and make it clear of those zones, I think it will be a huge benefit to the county overall. So thank you. Councillor Griffiths, did you want to come in and say a few words there? No? Okay.
Chair, could I just, thanks for that, and really appreciate the member comments, always valid and useful. Just on the recommendations, I think, as you say, Chair, happy for that to proceed now towards a cabinet decision. And it's almost to start the process, really, isn't it, as indicated by members. And then the 2.3 then, Chair, is about the allocation of the costs. So we have discussed that with our finance colleagues, just to advise members that would be considered during the capital pressures review that will be going to council on the 29th of February. So I think if members are minded, this is important. We don't fall at the final hurdle, if you like, but the intention is that it's about £37,000 of estimated costs. And we redeem the costs for those town and community councils and Monmouthshire Housing Association, other landlords, through via a process. But in principle, we'll look to get that through the capital pressures review, and then we can obviously redeem some of that back from the respective landowners. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that moves us on to item 6, which is the Place Scrutiny Committee Forward Work Programme and Action List. Rob, did you want to come in here?
Thank Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very briefly, just I won't keep everyone. But the work programme is fairly self-explanatory as it is there. We're very full between now and the summer. One slight amendment, just during the meeting, one of the members asked in the pre-meeting about the replacement local development plan, deposit plan. That is indeed going back a month, so it'll be to our 23rd of May meeting. So I've had clarification on that. So just moving from April to May. I've sought clarity from officers as best I can for some of the items that we've had on our work programme for a while as possible future topics. So that's what I've done. If the ones that are in red, those are things that we knew we wanted to cover. Some of them had to be moved back. So those are down the bottom. So just if there's any confusion about that, but that's as best as we can fix the dates at the moment for those. I think that's the only thing I'd say. Obviously, we've got the special next month and another one. So we've got 6th and the 14th of March, and I'll send the invitations tomorrow for those.
Thank you, Robert.
Councillor Brown wanted to come back in, Chair.
Sorry?
Councillor Brown wanted to come back in on that.
Okay. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I just wondered, thanks for the revised timetable for the LDP. Do we know when it was going to go to full council then? Because I'm not sure what the dates of the meetings are in May and June at the moment. It's probably you can look at to see.
I've been told council in June.
In June?
Yeah, so we'll cover it at the end of May.
Thank you.
It's on our Cabinet and Council work planner, Councillor Brown, which brings me on to item 7. Are there any comments with regards to the Cabinet and Council work planner? No?
Chair, I wanted to ask about the toilet strategy, but I see we're due to discuss that on the 14th of March, so that's fine.
We'll be welcoming Dave back for that meeting. And to confirm minutes of the previous meeting, is anyone happy? Tudor, and can I have a seconder? Is anyone putting their hands up in the chamber?
Councillor Strong, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next meeting is Wednesday, the 6th of March, 2024 at 10 a.m. Thank you, members.
Thanks.
Thank you, officers. Thank you, Rob, Hazel.
Hope you feel better soon, Lisa.
Oh, me too.
Thanks, Chair.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair.